Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. Happy holidays. We thought we'd try something a little bit different this year and do a little holiday marathon. Not a lot of content coming out around the holidays sometimes, though not the case here. But I also thought we would put together this marathon for my dog who's having some separation anxiety. He's 13 and he doesn't like when we're gone. So maybe if he gets to listen to a Six Sided Discs marathon while we're gone, he'll be more chill. How much understability is too much understability? Well, we're about to find out, because we're testing about 20 understable distance drivers to find out which one is the most understable. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and this is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, where we test and compare as many discs as we can to find out just how accurate their flight numbers really are. A portion of today's video is sponsored by Ideo Sports. More about them in just a little bit. To understand why understable distance drivers are so important, I have to talk a little bit about my own disc golf journey. You see, when I first got into the sport, like most players, I was able to improve fairly quickly because, of course, I was very bad. As I made adjustments, I saw distance and accuracy improve quickly, but it wasn't long before my progress slowed, plateaued, and maybe over the last year or so, even started to go backwards, as I've been super busy making these YouTube videos and traveling with our mobile pop-up shops to actually get out and play. And what that means for me is that discs like my Mint Discs Freetail or my Discmania Astronaut are no longer reliably understable. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person slowly getting worse at disc golf. So there's probably someone else out there that wants to know what are really the most understable drivers. And that's what we're going to find out today. We've also had great feedback from all of you watching that you want to see players of different skill levels throwing the discs. So in addition to Caleb throwing these today, I'll be throwing some later in the video so we can actually see if they're understable for an average player like me. We'll also be assigning a rating to these discs, and we're basically going to decide whether their flight numbers don't matter, meaning they're completely wrong, almost matter, meaning they were only slightly off, or do matter, meaning they are spot on. Let's kick things off with the Innova Vulcan. The Vulcan is rated at 13.5, -4.2, and is a sharp-edged, wide-rim driver. And frankly, the Vulcan is the perfect place to start, because this is what you want from an understable distance driver. A smooth flip to flat, easy turn, but decent distance. However, all may not be exactly as it seems, because we have another Star Vulcan. And this Star Vulcan was really overstable. It seems Vulcans may vary quite a bit from run to run. So for the Vulcan, the flight numbers don't matter. Let's move on to the Discmania Active Premium Astronaut. The Astronaut is part of Discmania's Active line, produced by Yikun Discs in China, and is rated at 12.6, -4.1, and should be a solidly understable disc. And I should know, because this is mine. In fact, I have proof of how well it used to fly, from when I first got it in a mystery box battle a couple of years ago. And as you can see, it has a wonderfully smooth turn. And how did it fly for Caleb? Well, still plenty understable. But for me, it's not reliably understable anymore. So while the flight numbers do matter for the Astronaut, it wasn't the most understable disc that we tested. Next up is the Discraft Nuke SS in Z plastic. We've tested a lot of Discraft discs, and one thing we're fairly confident about is Z plastic generally being more overstable than its flight numbers say, especially for beginner to intermediate players. And that is true of the Nuke SS in Z plastic. While the Nuke SS has some turn, it is definitely not quite a -3 for us. So its flight numbers almost matter, and we'll move on to a pair of shoes. Yep, you heard me right, a pair of shoes, because this portion of today's video is sponsored by Ideo Sports. When you're throwing a shot, you need to be focused on just one thing, that shot. Unfortunately for me, after tearing a ligament in my ankle over a decade ago and having surgery to fix it a couple years back, I spend most of my pre-shot routine, as well as most of my run-up, worrying about how I'm going to plant my foot. And after purchasing a pair of idiosyncrasies for myself over the holidays, I'm slowly starting to see that worry go away. Obviously, you can slip and fall with any pair of shoes, but knowing that I'm using the only shoes that are purpose-built for disc golf is a huge confidence boost for me personally. The Syncrasy features omnidirectional grips, giving you the confidence to approach forehands and backhands on any surface. The Syncrasy is waterproof, has extra toe protection for those toe draggers out there, something I'm guilty of myself, and specialized pivot zones. The pivot zones are in perfect positions for you to comfortably throw on hyzer, flat, or anhyzer with ease. This is the first pair of shoes that I've ever bought online without trying them on first in a store. I used the sizing guide on their website and got the perfect size for me on the first try. But worry not, if you don't get it on the first try, they have a 15-day return and exchange policy to make sure that you get the size that's right for you. Ideo Sports is actively working on having continuous in-stock inventory for the 2023 season, so no more pre-order wait times in your future. The 2023 Syncrasy is available in 3 different colors: Bird Hunter, Heritage, and my personal favorite, because I love black shoes, Smoke. You can also support some of your favorite pros with the 2023 Nate Sexton Limited Edition colorway or the Paige Pierce Shattered Skyline, which is expected to be available January 21st. You can learn more about the Idiosyncrasy at the link in the video description, and make sure that you use code 6sided discs, that's 6sided discs spelled out, for free shipping on your order. I cannot recommend the Syncrasy highly enough. I bought it with my own money, tried it, liked it, and then reached out to them to sponsor our channel. Huge thanks to Ideo Sports once again. They support disc golf, so make sure that you support them. Now let's get back to the understable discs, and I can throw some with my new shoes on. Ask any Innova fan what the best understable distance driver is, and they'll probably all respond, the Mamba. The Mamba is one of only 2 discs we're testing today rated with a -5 turn, which means it should be one of the most understable. Well, for Caleb, absolutely. On every throw, the Mamba had effortless, easy turn for Caleb. And not even just that, but huge distance as well. But what about for me? Well, I'm pleased to report that it was understable for me as well. So the flight numbers definitely do matter for the Mamba. But let's compare this to a disc that didn't fly the same for Caleb and I, the Alpha Discs Atlantis. Now, firstly, I want to point out when I ordered the Atlantis, it was listed as a distance driver, but now it says it's a control driver, so maybe some of the numbers got updated after I initially ordered it. But it is rated at 9 speed, 6 glide, -4 turn, and 1 fade, which means it's the only disc under a 10 speed we're looking at today. And let's watch Caleb and I throw it side by side. And the Atlantis is all turn for Caleb, no question. But for me, only a slight turn before fading back. Now, I'm not necessarily upset about that flight path, but when you consider the disc is rated -4 turn, I'd like to think it would be more understable for me. So the flight numbers almost matter for the Atlantis. But let's move on to our next disc, the Infinite Discs Maya. Now, the Maya looks and feels a lot like the Mamba, but as we know from past experience testing Innova-made discs, the run and the plastic can have a huge impact on the disc stability. Rated at 11.5, -3.1, we're testing a Halo S-Blend version. Innova's Halo plastic is typically more overstable than their other blends, so I wasn't at all surprised when this Maya actually had some low-speed fade. But honestly, if we watch that flight again, and look at the flight numbers of -3 turn and 1 fade, they look spot on to me. So the flight numbers do matter for the Maya. But this is one of the things that got me thinking more about flight numbers. If that's what -3.1 looks like to me, what does -2.2 look like? Well, we have 4 different discs, 12 or 13 speed, with -2 turn and 2 fade, with the Discmania Majesty, the Innova Shrike, the Innova Turn, and the Lone Star Bayonet. Now, I'm not necessarily looking to directly compare all these discs to each other. That's not necessarily useful when going from manufacturer to manufacturer. However, what I want to know is, how do each of these manufacturers approach their flight numbers? What does -2.2 mean to them? And let's get things started with the Majesty. Rated at 13.5, -2.2, it's another disc from Discmania's Active line. It's the fastest disc in the active line, and by far the least beginner friendly, because for me, it was crazy overstable. And before you think this is one of those situations where I just needed a little more power and it would fly great for Caleb, the Majesty was also crazy overstable for Caleb. So I'm gonna have to say the flight numbers don't matter for the Majesty, but how does it compare with another -22 disc? Well, with nearly the exact same flight numbers, let's take a look at the Innova Shrike. The Shrike is rated at 13.6 -22, and we're gonna test two of them, one in Champion Glow plastic and one in Star plastic. And compared to the Majesty, there's a significant difference. Both Shrikes had some decent turn before they faded out, something we didn't see at all with the Majesty. And I think this is a little bit more what I expect -22 to look like. At least the disc is moving in both directions, rather than just holding a line and just fading out. So the Shrike's flight numbers matter. I think they're just about right. But what about another disc from Innova? Let's see that Glow turn in action. Now the turn we're testing is in Champion Glow plastic, and as you can see, it's stamped 12.6 -22. And this gives us a great opportunity to compare one -22 disc from Innova to another. Though I should point out the turn looks a little bit more like the Mamba than the Shrike. However, watching them side by side, they couldn't be more different. The Shrike has just that slight turn before fading out, while the turn holds true to its name and turns. Perhaps one clue though why the turn is so understable can be found on Innova's website, because in every other plastic other than Champion Glow, the turn looks to be rated at -3 turn instead of -2. And after seeing this flight, that makes a lot more sense. So at least in Champion Glow plastic, I don't think the turn's flight numbers matter so much. On to our last -22 disc, this time from Lone Star with the Bayonet. Rated at 13.5 -22, our Bayonet today is in Bravo plastic, a slightly softer premium plastic. And considering the Bayonet was Emerson Keith's go-to distance driver last year, you can probably already predict that it wasn't very understable at all. In fact, it was by far the most overstable disc we tested, full stop. I certainly wouldn't rate it at -22. Its flight numbers definitely don't matter. It's more like a 0.3, at least for us. So -22 seems to mean very different things to different manufacturers. Let's move on then to a couple discs you're probably less familiar with, beginning with the Yikun Way. As we've mentioned many times, Yikun manufactures the active line for Discmania, which means there's always a little game of which Discmania disc is this when we check out a new disc from Yikun. The flight numbers of 10.5 -2.52 puts the Way pretty darn close to Discmania's 11-speed Mentor, but they are definitely different molds. And given the poor track record of Discmania's active line so far in this video and in other videos we've done, I have no idea how this is going to fly. So let's take a look. Caleb gives it a rip on plenty of hyzer, as he's been doing with most of these discs, and the Way flips up and gets a nice, long, smooth turn. And honestly, that's a pretty nice flight. I like it a lot. But as far as flight numbers go, while I can see the -2.5 turn, I don't see 2 fade in there. So the Way's flight numbers almost matter, but that's it. Now on to a disc we've never thrown from a manufacturer I know nothing about. It's the Dream from Wing It Disc Golf. Wing It Disc Golf is a new company started by two brothers in Utah. At least that's what I was able to learn after some quick research. They only produce 3 discs. The Dream was their second ever mold. And boy, is it understable. Rated at 13.5 -41, its flight numbers very much do matter, as the Dream had plenty of turn every single time we threw it. Next, a disc with exactly the same flight numbers, the Doomsday Pestilence. Our Pestilence is in their glow plastic called Radioactive Waste, and in addition to having a very similar set of flight numbers, it kind of looks the same as the Dream as well. And unsurprisingly, it flew almost exactly the same as the Dream. Another disc for the flight numbers do matter tier, but there's even more understable discs to be found. So let's take a look at the DGA Sail. The Sail is the other -5 turn disc that we have today alongside the Mamba. And I have a particular bone to pick with the Sail. You see, when my wife Emily started to get into disc golf, she of course relied on my recommendations for discs that might actually fly well for her. And she is very much influenced by brand. She loves Discraft and pretty swirly discs. So I was able to convince her to take a chance on this swirly purple Sail because Discraft makes it for DGA. And it's supposed to be really understable. But as Caleb's going to show us, if it only turns this much for him, imagine how much it doesn't turn for a beginner. So the DGA Sail's flight numbers don't matter as far as I'm concerned, and
That's it.
That's all I have to say about that.
Let's quickly move on to another disc from Lone Star, the aptly named Tumbleweed. Sometimes a disc name just makes sense, and it fits perfectly. The idea of a super understable disc being named after something that rolls is fantastic. Comment below what other discs really hit the nail on the head with their names. I'm thinking Magnet, Cloudbreaker. Share your thoughts. Anyways, for the Tumbleweed to really live up to its name, it needs to be super understable and ideally easy to roll. So, is it understable? You betcha. Can it roll? Once again, yes. The Tumbleweed is the real deal. The flight numbers matter, and let's make a quick trip from Texas to Finland for the Prodiscus Fasti. The Fasti, I have to say, has some of the most unique flight numbers around. While most discs that are rated with a lot of turn usually aren't rated with much fade, the Fasti claims to have -3 turn and 4 fade. And honestly, looking at this disc, I'm very suspicious of where this fade is going to come from. But I always try to stay open-minded and not judge a disc before we throw it. But in this case, we were right. I don't know where that 4 fade is hiding. I don't see anything on the disc that's going to create that fade. So just go ahead and assume that those flight numbers don't matter, and let's move it right along to the Viking disc's Berserker. This Domi 10 speed is rated at 5 glide, -3 turn, and 2 fade. Viking Discs makes one of the discs that inspired this Flight Numbers Don't Matter series, the Odin, which, with the same flight numbers as the Destroyer, flew in the exact opposite direction. So how will our Berserker fare? Well, the Berserker's flight numbers almost matter because it has all sorts of turn. But once again, I'm not seeing that low speed fade. I think in the case of the Berserker, as well as the Way from Yikun, we just didn't see them maybe at a lower arm speed or saw them high enough in the air to catch that low speed fade on camera. Just 4 discs remain, and all of them are rated with -4 turns, so I have high hopes that we'll find our most understable distance driver in just a moment. First up for the home stretch is my very pretty Mint Discs Freetail. And yes, this is my Freetail I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, like I said, for me, it hasn't been reliably understable in a long time, but can it fly anywhere near 10.5 -4.1 for Caleb? Absolutely. If you've got reliable power, the Freetail will be a reliably understable disc, but I don't. So its flight numbers do matter, but it's still not the most understable disc that we threw. So what about our last entry from Lone Star Discs, the 12-speed Harrier? Rated at 12.6 -4.1 on their website, but 12.6 -3.2 on the disc, it's a very aerodynamic, domey, high-speed driver. So which flight numbers are correct? Well, why don't you decide for yourself? Here we can see the Harrier easily flipping over, catching edge, and rolling right over the hill, pushing about 400 feet with ease. Which of the flight numbers would you pick? I think I'm leaning toward -4.1 for Caleb. I will say, of the discs we tested, it wasn't the fastest to turn, but once it started, it never stopped, which might make it great for big controlled rollers. But as always, beware, because with these faster discs, you can often see a big difference from one arm speed to another. So let's see how it flew for me. Now, I'll admit I got it slightly nose up, but it still gets a big turn, as you can see, and it is getting some actual low speed fade, which is a stark contrast to Caleb's shot. Overall, though, I'd say the Harrier's flight numbers do matter, and it is definitely one of the most understable discs that we tested. Now for our next to last disc, the Prodigy D6. Now, I will say everything that we've tested so far has been within 4 grams of max weight. That's 175 grams. While this Prodigy D6 in air plastic is 162. Now, from our weight video earlier in this series, we know that lighter discs are likely going to leave the hand a little bit faster, but they are also going to be more easily affected by the wind. But I'm quite confident in saying that this disc would still be crazy understable, because this is what happened when we threw it today. For Caleb, it was a huge roller, turning over super quickly, but interestingly, it held its angle on the ground very nicely. For me, I threw it nose up, high, and still got a roller. That once again pushed straight before curling up. And I firmly believe even if you add another 10 grams to that disc, it's still going to be super understable. So if you're looking for a long distance roller or just a reliably understable disc, the D6 from Prodigy is a perfectly reasonable choice. But somehow, some way, that was still not the most understable distance driver we found, because that spot was reserved for the Divergent Discs Basilisk, rated at 12.6 -4. I mean, just look at it. Do I even need to tell you how ridiculously understable this is going to be? It's like 90% dome. And in this springy max grip plastic, it feels crazy. So without further ado, here is the most understable distance driver we found.
No, baby. Oh, no.
Bye.
Yikes.
Sweet.
Yeah, throw however you want and then try and get out of the way because it's going to go to the right. There it goes. Look at that thing go. It's out of frame. So there you have it. The Divergent Discs Basilisk was by far the most understable distance driver that we could find. Its flight numbers probably only almost matter because honestly, it's deserving of a -5 or a -6 turn, as far as we're concerned. So which of these discs would I try bagging for myself? Well, I think I'm going to start with the Innova Mamba. I think it had the most usable understability. Obviously it's understable, there's plenty of it, but it's not just like crashing out super crazy understable, so it might be a little more workable if I add more angle to it. If that doesn't work out, I'm probably going to be heading to Lone Star, which is not something I expected to say. The Tumbleweed was nice and consistently unreliable, and I do like the smaller rim. I'm not a huge fan of like 12 and 13 speed discs. They just don't feel comfortable for my backhand. And maybe the backup to that would be the Harrier. It is a little bit bigger, it's not as comfortable, but it was super understable, so I think there's still some potential there that it could work for me. And to be completely honest, I don't want to need either of these discs, maybe at least until I'm in my 50s and my elbow's all ruined or something like that. So hopefully I can hold them off and stick with some of these other options for the time being. And this whole understable distance driver journey was a wild ride, so I hope you enjoyed it. Huge thanks again to Ideo Sports for sponsoring today's video. Make sure you check out the link in the video description and use the code 6SIDEDDiscs to get free shipping on your order. And before you go, comment below what you throw for your most understable distance driver, and let us know what else we should test in the future for our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series. For 6-Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. We've encountered this in other videos with some... I bit my tongue. Ow. However, all may aim, especially for beginners or but as Caleb's gonna show us, but they are definitely That's all I have to say about that. And let's make a quick trip from Texas all the way to Finland. No, let's not do that. So which of these discs would I... Oh boy. And before you go, comment below what... Oh boy.
Are you kidding
Oh
me?
my gosh. Wait, though, it could do something. So just wait.
Where's that forfeit at?
Just wait.
You gotta wait on that forfeit. This way is. Okay. That was on my thing. I don't know. I can't do that one. That happened yesterday too. Same exact thing.
Still going.
It's like it sticks to my index.
These are... If you like this content and want to see more... Today, I am testing and comparing all 27 of these overstable mid-ranges. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and yes, I have a cold. But never mind that, this is Flight Numbers Don't Matter. And yes, you heard me right, I will be throwing the discs today. But why am I testing the discs today and not Caleb, who usually throws all the shots in our video? Well, I'll answer that question with a question. You ever get out on the course and just feel like there's a shot missing from your bag? Well, I very much have that feeling right now, and it's a slot in between these two discs. My Eagle McMahon Prism Proton Envy is reliably overstable, and it's great for 200 to 230 foot shots that finish reliably but smoothly to the left. And then we have my Lucid Ice Orbit Bear, which around an 8 speed is great for pushing out to 300 feet or so, but I have to really give it some power to get there because it's pretty overstable for me. But that's fine, because that's what I want. However, I don't have anything for in between those discs, a mid-range that goes around 250 to maybe 270 feet and gets a little movement to the left. If I power up too hard on the Envy, I either turn it over or grip lock it. And if I power down on the Evader, I usually have an early release or miss my line. So, what's I gotta do? Well, it's not like I haven't been trying to figure this out. I've previously bagged this Discraft Malta, a Discmania MD5, a Discmania Mutant, and more than a few other discs for that sort of overstable mid-range slot. But the Malta and ESP plastic is just not as overstable as I expected, while the MD5 and the Mutant are just too overstable to be usable, for me anyways. Ideally, what I want is a reliably overstable mid-range that has some glide. I can count on it to hit a gap. Hopefully it gives me confidence when I pull it out of my bag. And it has a nice, reliable, low-speed fade. We've selected these supposedly overstable mid-ranges based on their flight numbers because that's what most players do. And hopefully through the course of our testing, we'll find out just how accurate some of those flight numbers are for my arm speed. Just before we get started though, I hope you're enjoying our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series. It's one of our favorites to make, but it is also the most work by far. So when this video is over, consider supporting us by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, backing us on Patreon, picking up a disc from our online store, sixsideddiscs.com, or even buying one of the actual mid-ranges we throw in today's video in our From Our YouTube section on the site, and get 10% off because they are slightly used. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. And let's begin with a mid-range that I have already thrown, but in a different plastic. This is the Crystal Flex Malta. Now, if you've thrown a Discraft ESP Malta, you already know that the flight numbers of 5413 are a bit questionable. It just isn't that overstable. But today, we have the new Ledgestone Crystal Flex Malta. Might it provide a little more stability? Let's find out. Now, I am trying to throw all of these shots just about flat, and the Malta is pretty close. I'm pretty impressed with the Crystal Flex Malta. It has that little bit more stability than the ESP, so it's an early contender, and I'm going to have to add it to our shortlist. Next, let's take a look at another offering from Discraft, the Wasp. Rated at 5302, we have the Wasp in two different plastics today. Z, their translucent premium plastic, and a Ledgestone CT blend, which stands for Crazy Tough. It's a super stiff base plastic. The Wasp is not too dissimilar in shape to the Malta, but let's see how differently it flies. With both of these Wasps side by side, they fly almost exactly the same. The release on the Z-Wasp was maybe a tiny bit early, but you can still see both discs flip to flat momentarily before fading out. Honestly, not far off of the Malta, but those having a tendency to flip to flat is maybe not quite what I'm looking for, because I want this mid-range to be able to withstand a headwind, and any lack of torque resistance is probably going to put me off at this point. Let's move away from Discraft now and onto Discmania with the Method. Rated at 5503, the Method has that same shape on the wing as the Malta and the Wasp. And like the Wasp, we have the Method in two different plastics today. Neo, which is a semi-translucent premium plastic, and Exo Hard, a stiff mid-grade plastic. Let's see how they fly. The Exo Hard Method came out slightly nose down, but flips to flat and holds before a minimal fade, while the Neo Method flies quite a bit more overstable than the Exo Hard, and way closer to what I'm looking for. However, I'm just not a huge fan of how the Method feels in my hand. I don't know if it's the shape or depth of the rim, but it just doesn't quite fit. So the Method is not going to make the shortlist, and let's move on to the Reptilian Disc Golf Gila. We had the Gila in our first impression series where we explored Reptilian Disc Golf for the first time. And once again, there's not much wrong with the flight. It might get a tiny flip to flat, but then a nice smooth fade. And once again, the Gila, through no fault really of the flight, is not going to make my list because I just don't really like the feel of it in my hand. So let's move on to what is probably the best selling disc that we're going to test today, the Innova Rock 3. And we have the Rock 3 in three different plastics, beginning with Halo Star. Halo Star is, of course, Innova's most popular premium blend these days. We also have it in KC Pro, which is a very stiff, slick mid-grade plastic, and XT Galactic, a swirly mid-grade plastic that's just a tiny bit softer and grippier than KC Pro. In XT Galactic, the Rock 3 quickly gets a slight turn and just holds that turn for nearly the whole flight, which is definitely not what I'm looking for. But what about KC Pro? And it's a similar story to the XT Galactic. It flips up, holds a little less turn before eventually fading out. But that drift to the right is definitely not what I'm looking for. Finally, let's see that Halo Star Rock 3. And I will say I didn't quite get this as flat as I would like, but I knew before I threw it that the Halo Rock 3 would be plenty overstable. And honestly, the Halo Rock 3's flight is pretty spot on for what I'm looking for, but it's not going to make my shortlist. And you might find that surprising, but let me explain why. Now, call me crazy, but the Malta, Rock 3, Gila, Method, and finally Wasp all have a very similar design. A sharply curved rim with a bead, and all I can say is it's just not for me. The only reason the Malta ever made it in my bag in the first place was because it was a little bit smaller. But why do I take the time to show all these discs if I kind of know that I'm not going to like them? Well, obviously the Rock 3 is hugely popular, and this disc shape might work just fine for other players. So while it's not my preference, there's clearly some flights in there that could work great for you if you like the feel in your hand. Let's move on then and see if we can find a shape, feel, and flight that works for me. And next up is the Legacy Badger. Completely different from many of the discs we've seen so far, the Badger is a flat top, small diameter mid-range rated at 6 speed, 3 glide, 0 turn, and 3 fade. And I'm a big fan of the flight. You can hit it hard, it's super torque resistant, but it also doesn't fade so aggressively that you can't get any distance from it. Plus, this Pinnacle plastic feels really nice. So the Badger is going to make the short list for now, and let's move on to the Cybertruck itself, the Discmania Mutant. Rated at 5304, by flight numbers alone, it's the most overstable disc we're likely to have. And by actual flight, it's the most overstable disc we have. So by any metric, it's the most overstable disc we have. And it's off my list, because it's the most overstable disc we have. Anyways, now for something completely different. Let's see a pair of discs from Doomsday, starting with the Desolation in Toxic Waste Plastic. Now, the Desolation is interesting. At first glance, it doesn't look like it should work. It has a very similar bottom to the old Rock 3, Wasp, or Method that we tried earlier, but the top mold is huge and overall makes the disc way bigger in my hand, which actually feels kind of nice. Rated at 5502, the Desolation flew great, holding straight ever so briefly before a smooth, gradual fade. So I'm surprised to say that the Doomsday Desolation is going on the short list, even though it smells horrible. How about the other entry from Doomsday then? The Scope. Rated at 4402, my initial reaction to the Scope was that it looks weird. Feels weirder, but flies pretty good. Actually flew pretty nice though. I'm honestly not really sure what to make of the Scope. It's such a weird shape and a weird, feel in the hand. The plastic is super soft and rubbery, but it flew okay. So I would say it's a solid disc, but I don't think it's going to make my shortlist just because that hand feel isn't quite right. Next, for the exact opposite of rubbery, it's time for the Alpine Hemp Magnolia from AGL. The Magnolia is a 5-speed mid-range, rated with 5 glide, no turn, and 2 fade. And this Alpine Hemp plastic is board flat, stiff, but still has a pretty nice grip. But how does it fly? Well, it doesn't stay above ground level for long because the Magnolia is beef. It reminds me of old Looney Tunes characters where Wile E. Coyote would run off a cliff just to realize where he was and then suddenly start crashing to the earth. Magnolia flies off the cliff, suddenly realizes it's in the air, and then plummets with a huge fade. That being said though, the flight's not far off of what I'm looking for, so the Magnolia is on the short list. Up next, we head southeast from AGL's home base of Northern California to the plains of Texas. It's time for the Mint Discs Mustang. The Mustang is a popular mid-range for Mint Discs, rated at 5502. And this is one of those examples where flight numbers only mean so much. For me, in this eternal plastic, the Mustang gets a lot more turn than I'm looking for. But it does eventually come in with a nice fade at the end. And I'm a bit torn because the Mustang looks great, it feels great, they've got a ton of plastic varieties that are all made by MVP, which is super appealing, but that flight is just not quite what I'm looking for, so the Mustang is off my list. And let's head north from Mint Discs to Kansas and Dynamic Discs with the EMAC Truth. And because we're also working on a video with a bunch of different Trilogy plastics, we happen to have the EMAC Truth in 3 different blends: Lucid Ice Glimmer, Lucid, and finally Fusion Orbit. All 3 of these are rated at 5502, but Dynamic says that the Lucid Ice plastic should be a little bit more overstable and also a little stiffer than Lucid. Let's begin with the Fusion Orbit EMAC Truth. With a slight breeze blowing, you can see the EMAC Truth bouncing along in the wind and then turning quite a bit more than I'm looking for from an overstable mid-range. Meanwhile, the Lucid EMAC Truth comes out with a tiny bit of anhyzer, but quickly corrects that with some generous low-speed fade. Not bad at all. So what about this Lucid Ice Glimmer plastic? Well, as advertised, it's the most overstable of the 3. And I'd say of the 3, it's the only one that's going to make it on my short list. From one Trilogy brand to another, let's take a look at the Westside Bard. We have the Bard in VIP plastic, and we know all about the Bard, as we put it up against 3 other overstable mid-ranges in our Disc is in the Details series some time ago. But even so, I've never actually thrown it myself, so let's see what it's got. And wow, the Bard is very overstable. With flight numbers of 5403, I didn't really know what to expect, other than that it's much more overstable than most of the discs we've tested. So if you're looking for a really, really beefy mid-range, the Bard is up there on that list. Up next is one of the discs we tested against the Bard in that video, the Discraft Buzz OS. With the exact same flight numbers of 5403, we have the Buzz OS in ESP plastic, which is honestly not my favorite. It looks incredible, but I often feel that it's just too slick for my hand. But either way, how will it fly? Well, that slick plastic comes out just a little early. I struggled to get the release I was looking for on any of the throws with the BuzzOS, honestly. But it is super overstable. But it's not what I'm looking for. Up next, another disc that's manufactured by Discraft, but bears someone else's name. It's the DGA Quake. And while we can't really see the profile view because black disc on black backdrop doesn't really work, maybe it works with my forehead as a backdrop. There we go. The Quake is rated at 5303 and is actually a disc that I've bagged before. And this flight shows why. A nice stand-up before a nice fade is exactly what I was looking for. The Quake is definitely a contender and is going on the short list. And now on to our last disc from Discmania. It's the MD5. This is actually the overstable mid-range that I've been bagging lately, which should tell you everything about its chances in this video. Because, honestly, I don't like it. Now, it does feel great for forehands, but there's not a single disc in the world that's going to take my yarn out of my bag, and the yarn flies better on forehand than the MD5. And as you might imagine, I don't really like the backhand grip, or else I wouldn't be needing to do this video. But nevertheless, let's see how it flies. And seeing as it shares the same flight numbers as the Mutant 5304, it should come as no surprise that it's just too overstable. And while the flight here looks pretty good, it traveled a good 70 feet less than what I'm looking for. Only 4 discs remain, and up first is the Luftdiscs Silicon in Supernova plastic. And this is the wild card here today because honestly, this is the disc that I want to replace the MD5. So let's see if it can do the job. Rated at 5403, it looks good. And as you can see here, it flies good. But it's sad because I'm afraid to say the silicone is just not for me. I really like the feel of the plastic. I really love the look of the Supernova blend, but it just doesn't fit my hand, which is one of those things that you can't really understand until you get your hands on a disc and feel it in your hand. It's just like the rim is a little bit too shallow. There's something about it. So as much as I want it to be on the short list, it's not. So with that bitter disappointment, let's see if the Clash Discs Mango is any sweeter. Rated even more overstable at 5404, the Mango's profile doesn't really make you think it would be that much more overstable than anything else we've tested today. But the Mango's flight numbers are pretty accurate. As you can see, the Mango doesn't have much glide, a really big fade, and probably just a bit more juice than I'm looking for. Which brings us to our final 2 discs, which you might be surprised to learn are both from Prodigy. Now, Prodigy gets a bad rap these days, but I try to have an open mind, so let's take a look at the M2 and then the Archive. The Prodigy M2 was only the second Prodigy disc approved by the PDGA. It actually used to be called the M3, but they changed the name to keep their stability ratings consistent. The ratings for this one are 5402, and it has kind of a similar look and shape and feel to that Doomsday Desolation from earlier. And here in Prodigy's 500 plastic has a nice mix of grip and flexibility. Off the tee, the M2 resists flipping up, but doesn't fade too aggressively either, resulting in a smooth, overstable flight. Not bad at all, so I'm surprised to say the Prodigy M2 is going on the short list. Which takes us to our final disc, the Archive. Developed in partnership with 2023 World Champion Isaac Robinson, Prodigy says it occupies a slot in their lineup between the M1 and M2, rated at 5502. It's designed for accuracy and reliable overstability. We have the Archive in 400 plastic, which is also slightly flexible, but with more grip than the 500 blend. And how does it fly? Well, with the tiniest flip to flat, followed by a nice, smooth, but big fade, it looks to fit exactly what I'm looking for. But you know what they say, twice Earth luck. And with a touch of hyzer, it holds that angle nicely for a smooth, overstable flight. Not dumping out, but not flipping up either. So I'm really impressed with the Archive, both in feel and in flight. So it's going to go on that short list, and it's high time that we start to narrow that down. Our short list is the Discraft Crystal Flex Malta, Legacy Pinnacle Badger, Doomsday Toxic Waste Desolation, AGL Alpine Hemp Magnolia, Dynamic Discs Lucid Ice Glimmer EMAC Truth, the DGA Proline Quake, the Prodigy 500 M2, and finally the Prodigy 400 Archive. Let's quickly narrow this down then. The Crystal Flex Malta, it's out. I know when it starts to get warmer, this gummy Crystal Flex plastic is just going to be too flexible for what I'm looking for. But if you are looking for a more overstable Malta and you don't mind that added flex, this new Crystal Flex one is definitely going to be on your list. The Legacy Badger has got to be out, and that's simply because, again, it just doesn't fit and feel well in my backhand grip. No hard feelings. It feels great on forehands. Now, the Doomsday Toxic Waste Desolation feels great. It flies great, but once again, this plastic is just super gummy and flexible. And I think in the warm summer months here in Ohio, this is just not going to get a clean release. And there's only so much chalk to go around. Also, it absolutely stinks. Next, the AGL Alpine Hemp Magnolia. And this is kind of the opposite issue to the Malta and Desolation. Where they're too soft, this thing, it's just stiff as a board, and it's a little bit too shallow for my backhand grip. So Magnolia is out. And that leaves us with the EMAC Truth in Lucid Ice Glimmer, the DGA Proline Quake, the Prodigy 400 Archive, and the Prodigy 500 M2. And I'm going to have to give the win to the 400 Archive. All four of these discs flew fairly similarly, but if I have to pick just one, I'm picking the one that feels the best in my hand, that gives me the most confidence when I'm out on the course, and that just has to be the 400 Archive. This Archive is going straight into my bag for my first competitive tournament in 3 years, I think, which is actually happening 2 days after this video is released. So, wish me luck. And I'm not too worried about being competitive. I'm just excited to be back out playing. For those of you that have watched our channel for a while, you know I've struggled with some elbow injuries. I even had a pretty nasty fall 2 weeks ago, which I was concerned was going to put me out of this tournament, but we pulled through and we'll be there. And if you want updates on how that goes, let me know in the comments and I'll share it on our community page. Remember, if you like the look of any of the other mid-ranges you saw in this video, you can find them on our website in our From Our YouTube section for 10% off. What do you throw for your overstable mid-range? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what flight numbers or slots we should explore next. Remember, flight numbers don't matter. You don't know a disc until you throw it. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. And yes, I have a cold, but never mind that. But why am I throwing the discs and not Caleb, who typically So only 4 discs remain, and up first is the Luft discs. I forgot the name. All 3 of these are rated at 5502, but latitude, excuse me. There's clearly some flights in there that could work great for you if you like the feel in your hand. Oh man. Come on, cough drop, do your job. Oh, there's going to be a lot of coughs. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and this is Flight Numbers Don't Matter. Today we're testing and comparing a dozen discs rated around 9, 5, -1, 2 to see how they compare. And so far in this series, we have explored a lot of different fairway drivers. The T-Bird 7502 slot, some 6 to 9 speed straight fairway drivers like the FD or Crave, and the ever popular Firebird and Thunderbird slots. And for 3 of those 4 slots, there were tons of discs available. But for some reason, there were almost no discs rated with the same numbers as a Thunderbird. And we think we may have figured out why. We think it might have something to do with how popular the 95-12 slot has become. For example, Discraft, Discmania, Dynamic Discs, MVP, and Castoplast don't have a disc in their lineup with the same numbers as a Thunderbird. Instead, they all opt for discs at 95-12. Why that is, we don't really know. But what it means is that there is effectively a much more competitive market for these discs than for discs with the same numbers as a Thunderbird. If you ask almost any player why they would throw a fairway driver instead of a distance driver, it all boils down to accuracy. So regardless of what other flight characteristics you might get from this disc, it needs to land pretty much exactly where you want it to. While Firebird and T-Bird type discs are about accurate over stability, the 95-12 slot is probably more about straight, controlled shot shaping. These discs can probably get a little bit of turn, but low speed over stability is crucial for accuracy. And because accuracy is a huge part of what makes these discs good, while we're still looking at the overall flight path just like we normally do, we now have a specific aiming point, and we are trying to land all of these shots just to the right of the end of that fence, around 350 feet, slightly downhill. As usual, Team 6-sided discs Caleb Thomas is throwing for us today. Spring in Ohio means that course conditions look pretty good. It's about 75 degrees. We have a steady 10-mile-an-hour tailwind, so expect maybe some of these flights to be a touch more overstable than you might expect, though to adjust for that, Caleb is going to be throwing them a little bit harder than normal. Now that we understand the why, the what, and the where, let's get started throwing. Kicking things off with the Discraft Undertaker itself. Approved by the PDGA in 2016, it's rated at 95-12, and the Undertaker is arguably one of the most popular and well-known discs with these flight numbers. In Z Plastic, our Undertaker is just what you need from this slot. Overstable, but not so much that it sacrifices distance. Instead, just the amount we need for accurate placement. The perfect mix of control and distance. So that's a good baseline to get us started. Let's move on to a perhaps less well-known disc, the Lone Star Wrangler. Also rated at 95-12, it was only approved by the PDGA in November of 2023. But it has a completely different shape and feel to the Undertaker. So, will it fly any different? Well, not really. Caleb releases it a little bit later than the Undertaker, but the Wrangler is, as Lone Star says, overstable without being too aggressive. Now, I've mentioned this in other videos, but I'm compelled to mention it again. One of the things that I enjoy about testing and comparing discs is this kind of result. 2 discs that are designed to do the same thing, but designed in completely different ways, can achieve basically the same result, giving you, the player, the option to choose the one that feels right for you. Speaking of different feels but similar results, let's see if the same disc in 2 different plastics can achieve the same thing. It's the Infinite Discs Dynasty. We have the Infinite Discs Dynasty in 2 plastics, iBlend, which is an inexpensive sort of mid-grade premium plastic, and C-Blend Glow, which is Infinite's version of Innova's Champion Glow Plastic. Also rated at 95-12, Infinite Discs leans into the control aspect of this slot, describing the Dynasty as the epitome of control and versatility. Let's see if they're right. On the left, the iBlend Dynasty flips up to flat and holds there for a while before we get that slight fade. While on the right, the C-Blend Glow Dynasty looks a lot more like that first Z Undertaker, comfortably holding the line it's on, resisting flipping up, and not fading too much either. A nice, controllable flight. So the Dynasty is a solid entry into this category. If you have a slower arm and you still want that reliable accuracy, iBlend is a great option at around $14 to $15. If you need a beefier version, $20 to $22 for a nice glow one will get you done. Now, so far, every disc we've tested have the exact same flight numbers, 95-12, that we're sort of looking at for this category. But there were a lot of discs that were just on the fringe of having the exact same numbers, and we want to see how similar they are. For example, the ThoughtSpace Construct, Rated at 10.6, -1.2, the Construct is ThoughtSpace Athletics' versatile fairway driver. Let's see how it compares to these other discs we've seen so far. Well, one of these things is not like the others. Now, ThoughtSpace's description of the Construct does say that it's straight from start to finish, so maybe it's just not as torque resistant as some of these other discs, or maybe their interpretation of these flight numbers is different, but we would not put it in as a good replacement for an Undertaker. And I'm not sure if it was just the Construct that we chose to test is 174 grams or a Neutron plastic, but I'm curious, for those of you that throw the Construct, how does yours fly? Are they usually this understable? Leave a comment down below. Anyways, let's move on to another disc with almost the same flight numbers, the Clash Discs Cinnamon. Rated at 9.5, -1.52, Clash Discs released the Cinnamon in 2023 and call it a straight to understable fairway driver. Now the flight numbers are only off by 0.5 more turn than what we've tested so far. So does that really make that much of a difference off the tee? Maybe. Maybe there is a tiny bit more turn there, holding flat for just a moment, but it definitely does have the advertised low speed fade. So if you're a fan of other Clash discs, or you really like the feel of that steady plastic, the Cinnamon might fit this slot perfectly. Next up on the nearly the same flight numbers list is the Finish Line Rally. Rated at 8.5, -1.2, Finish Line says that while it is a straight flyer, it is also torque resistant and can handle a lot of power. So I told Caleb to give it the beans, and handle it did. The Rally was by far one of the most overstable discs that we tested in this category. So if you're the biggest, beefiest, Drew Gibson-y type thrower, the Rally is going to be the disc you want for this slot. And last on the almost the same flight numbers list, we have the Latitude 64 Saint Pro. Now you might be asking yourself, Greg, why don't you just test the Latitude 64 Saint, which has the same -1.2 turn and fade? And that's a valid question. And I have a really simple answer. We didn't have one, and we couldn't find one in time. So if you're dying to see how that Saint compares to some of the other discs in this category, and maybe other suggestions for us to test, let us know that you want to see a part 2 in the comments below. Anyways, the Saint Pro is rated at 8.5, -0.52, and is supposed to be a little bit more overstable and have less glide than the normal Saint. So can that match the accuracy and stability we're looking for? Well, everything's looking pretty good until that fence post got in the way. The Saint Pro, thrown hard and flat, held that slight fade for a nice, accurate shot. And that is exactly what we're looking for, fence post or not. And that leaves us with 5 more discs, all 5 having exactly the same flight numbers. We begin with the Discmania CD1. Now this is the new reinvented CD1 approved by the PDGA in 2022, and Discmania calls it a control driver rather than a fairway driver, which is actually true of more than a few of the discs that we've tested today. And we've tested a bunch of Discmania's discs in their new C-Line plastic, and we've often found them to be outrageously overstable, at least compared to their other plastic blends. So the biggest question here is whether the CD1 is actually usable amount of overstability, or if it's just a meat hook. Let's find out. And it is perfect. I'm delighted to see it just hold that gentle hyzer, still getting out to around 340 feet, and crucially, landing exactly where we want it. So it's well done from the CD1. Let's move on to a disc that you're probably not very familiar with, the Yikun discs B? According to Google Translate, it is B. So that's what we're going to go with. Also, of course, rated at 9.5, -1.2. This is one of Yikun's somewhat newer discs, approved in 2021. And it's also much domier than any of the other discs we've tested so far. This is also in their opaque premium plastic Dragon. Now, off the tee, Caleb puts the B on a generous hyzer angle, but as you can see, it doesn't stay there long because this is one of the first discs that actually turns over and holds some of that turn before it fades back. which is not necessarily a bad thing. This makes the Yikun B probably one of the more beginner-friendly discs in this category or with these flight numbers, and it's also one of the more inexpensive discs. Yikun base plastic usually runs around $8 or $9 retail and is going to be even more understable than this, but the Dragon plastic and Phoenix plastics are still usually only around $15, $16, $17, which is a great price for premium plastic. Next, let's take a look at another disc that perfectly fits these flight numbers, one that we actually tested in a recent video, the Dynamic Discs Escape. In our Trilogy plastic comparison, we had 3 different escapes to look at: Lucid, Lucid Glimmer, and Supreme. So if you want to learn more about the plastic specifically, click the link above and check out that video itself. But for today, we're just going to focus on the flight. Rated at 9.5 -1.2, the Escape has been one of Dynamic's most popular fairway drivers, which made it a strong candidate for their new Supreme line. However, as many of you commenters pointed out on that video, the Supreme Escape is actually a totally different mold. While it is trying to be the same mold as the Escape, they had to make a new one to utilize the new technology of the Supreme line. Of course, the big question we care about today is whether any of these 3 fit within the flight that we're looking for a 9.5 -1.2 disc. First up, let's see Lucid plastic. And that's a lot straighter than most of the discs that we've seen so far. What about Lucid Glimmer? And all right, so at first glance, this looks good until you realize that it blew past the 350-foot mark we had and was making its way well over 400 feet when it hit that tree. Jeez. And finally, what about the Supreme Escape? Well, as you can see, that's a lot more turn than we were looking for. And if you can listen close, you can actually hear Caleb say that he threw that with a fan grip.
Fan grip on the. You heard it. Go in. That's under the basket.
So what if you bump that up to a power grip and really let it rip?
I fell. Oh!
Holy yikes. So the Escape is not really what we're looking for in this slot. Even in Lucid Glimmer with that added overstability, it just has a tendency to glide and glide and glide a lot further than you'd really want for this slot. So let's move on to our next to last disc and see if it can be a real contender, the MVP Tesla. Rated at 9.5 -1.2, the Tesla is a longtime favorite of gyronauts everywhere. Ours today is in Neutron plastic, and let's see how it compares to the rest of the discs we've tested today. Well, the Tesla is one of the most overstable discs we tested. It doesn't flip up at all, and in addition to that overstability, it also flew really, really far and way, way left of our target. That's not to say that it isn't a good disc for this slot, but if you have the power for it, the Tesla might fly a little bit further than you might like. Finally, let's move on to our last disc, the Castoplast Lots. And we're testing a Charlie Goodpasture Tour Series Lots from a couple years ago that is just slightly thrown, but still in great condition. Of course, sharing the same flight numbers as the Tesla, the Lots is Castoplast's workhorse fairway driver, most commonly available in K1 plastic. So how does it fly? Well, at first glance, I was a little worried because the Lots does flip up to flat almost immediately, but then it holds that line before a generous low speed fade, landing pretty much exactly where we're aiming. Not bad at all. So looking back on these discs, there were a few outliers. The Thought Space Construct, the Dynamic Discs Escape, and the Yikun B were definitely a bit different. While the Wrangler and the Rally were really, really overstable. But overall, I am blown away by how many discs in this category fit exactly what we're looking for. In fact, it was much more than we typically see when we compare so many discs with the same flight numbers. What do you bag for this slot? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what flight numbers we should explore next. Remember, you can find the discs that we test in our videos while supplies last at sixsidediscs.com and take 10% off because they're lightly used. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and today, rated at 10.6, -1.2, the construct is so that's a good baseline to get us started. Let's see if some of the lesser known counterparts in this.
Tesla. You. Yep. There we go. I fell. Oh! That's on me. Slip on that one. All right.
Don't need a bleep on that one, Greg.
The incredible popularity of the MVP glitch has not gone unnoticed by other disc golf manufacturers. But why was the glitch the first disc of its type to really take off? Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and this is Flight Numbers Don't Matter. And with the recent release of the Axiom Pitch and the Discmania Spore, it's about time we revisit this category to see what's what. But before we do, we need to look back. Before the glitch took disc golf by storm in 2022, there were a few other discs that sort of occupied this space, such as the Latitude 64 Beetle. Though not marketed as a toss and catch disc, it was released in 2017. And while we here at Six Sided Discs have been in business since 2020, we couldn't order the Beetle from Latitude 64 until 2023, just a little while after the glitch took off. Coincidence? I think not. And while the Beetle might predate the glitch by a few years, the Discraft Rattler, though not technically a one-speed, is perhaps even less aerodynamic than the glitch, and this was approved by the PDGA a whopping 23 years before the Beetle, in 1994. So what exactly is contributing to the popularity of these super low-speed but high-glide, neutral, hybrid discs? And what do people actually use them for? Well, according to a poll of our YouTube subscribers, only 17% of players use hybrid toss and catch discs like the Glitch or Spore in competitive rounds, while 31% only throw them in casual rounds. 9% of those players only use them to warm up, and 44% don't use them at all. So it seems like we're really only talking to two audiences here: players that use these discs competitively and players that throw them for fun. And whether you throw these discs or not, you might still be curious what the new entries look like, from the Axiom Pitch to the Discmania Spore or to the upcoming OTB Open Proton Soft Glitch. So we're going to compare those to the stock Neutron Soft version of the glitch, as well as last year's Gyropalooza Eclipse Glitch. And I'm sure many of you already know the glitch is a deep beaded putter designed as a hybrid toss and catch disc. It's typically available between 145 and 154 grams, quite a bit lighter than the average disc. This Eclipse disc is of course the same mold, but in MVP's top-of-the-line glow plastic, which means it's not nearly as soft as the stock Neutron Soft plastic, and it may make it more appealing for use on the course. The new Axiom Pitch is also of course made by MVP and is their own follow-up to the glitch. The first release of the Pitch is in Total Eclipse plastic, which combines MVP's popular Eclipse plastic with the vibrant colors of Axiom discs, which typically have a different color for the rim and flight plate, except this time the color of the glow is what changes. There are tons of options available with combinations of white, green, teal, blue, or purple glow. Rated at 1.7, -0.50, the Pitch does not feature a bead and gives you a different hand feel to the glitch. To my hand, I think it feels a little bit deeper and a little bit more like a traditional Frisbee. But of course, that's going to be a lot about your own personal preference as to what feels better in your hand. Next, we have the Discmania Spore. And the Spore's entry into this space starts to make things feel a little congested. Rated at 1.701, it has a much different feel off the shelf. While it's also deep, blunt, slow, and beaded, the Neosoft plastic is much softer than Neutron Soft. And it has a lot more grip, at least off the shelf, though that sort of tackiness will be one of the first things to go after it slides through the dirt a few times. And because we know plastic can have a huge impact on how a disc flies, we're also going to compare the OTB Open Proton Soft glitch. This is of course the same glitch that you know and love, but in Proton Soft it's not quite as soft, and it features a beautiful trifoil stamp, and sometimes you get these great swirls from the Proton Soft plastic as well. So the big question here is just whether it flies any differently to other versions of the glitch that are already out there. So enough chit chat, let's take a look and see how these fly. And let's first see how the Eclipse and Neutron Soft glitch compare side by side. And both look just like a typical glitch should. From a slide hyzer off the tee, they flip up to flat and hold a very minimal turn before running out of steam, typically around 200 feet. Now let's compare that to the pitch. And it seems the pitch might have a tendency to be a little more understable. This first shot was really high, but on a lot of hyzer, it flipped flat and slowly held straight before a very minimal fade. But if we get that on a better nose angle, the pitch flips up quickly and begins a much more aggressive turn than the glitch. I'm not sure that there was much demand from anyone for a more understable version of the glitch, but maybe there's somebody out there that will be excited about how the pitch flies. What about the Spore though? Well, the Spore is the exact opposite. Because of the pronounced bead and blunt nose, the Spore is the first of these hybrid high glide one-speed discs to actually have some overstability. In fact, noticeably more than any of these other discs. And finally, let's see that Proton Soft glitch. On similar power and angle, the Proton Soft glitch gets just a little less turnover than the other glitches we tested, and a tiny fade, making it one of the more overstable glitches we've thrown in a long time. So what does this all mean for fans of these hybrid high glide one-speed discs? Well, we think it's good news, because now you have a one-speed in the Spore that can actually handle a little more wind. In the pitch, you have a one-speed that can get more effortless turn, possibly opening up new shot shapes that the glitch can't do. Now, with the popularity of a disc like the glitch, there's bound to be even more entries into this market, creating even more competition. But competition drives innovation, and the more innovation we see, the more likely we are to find discs that might work for different players under different circumstances. The pitch and the Spore are direct results of that competition, and that's good news for fans of these discs everywhere. You can find the Total Eclipse pitch and Discmania Spore at sixsideddiscs.com or at the link in the video description. Do you throw hybrid toss and catch discs? Why or why not? Leave a comment down below, and also comment below what flight numbers we should explore next. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Mic check. Mic check, mic check. Stop recording. And with the recent release of the Discmania Spore and Axiom pitch, this hybrid toss and catch glidey one-speed category is getting pretty. But even if you're not part of those two groups, you may be curious just how these new entries stack up. So let's talk more about those. Whether you're part of those two groups or not, you're probably curious. Whether you're part of those two groups or not, you might be curious what the new discs in this. Whether you're part of those categories or not, you may be curious. And whether you're part of those group. Now, of course, with the popularity of a disc like a glitch, there's bound to be even more. Whether you're part of those groups or not, you may be curious what the new entries in this category look like. So let's take a look. This mid-range supposedly has -3 turn, but as you can see, it doesn't. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, and that was a UV Glow Meteor from Discraft. And that's just one of the discs we'll be testing and comparing today, because we have this entire stack of understable mid-ranges. And we'll be putting them in order of stability to show you why shopping for a disc purely based on flight numbers is risky business. Back to that Meteor though, rated at 5.5, -3.1, you might expect it to be pretty understable. But whether it's this UV Glow plastic, or the fact that this one is max weight, it just didn't want to turn. On the other hand, we have this Westside VIP Tursus, and while its flight numbers of 5.5, -2.1 might make you think it has less turn, you'd be wrong, because the Tursus is way more understable, so much so that it catches edge and rolls. And yes, it's also max weight. We're going to be plotting all of these understable mid-ranges on this graph, according to the distance they travel, up and down, or stability, with overstable on the left and understable on the right, just like you right-handed backhand throwers out there. Which means the Meteor goes here, and the Tursus goes here. As I was working on this video, I was talking to somebody about the discs they have in their bag, and it seemed like they had most of the slots covered. An overstable putter, mid-range, fairway, and distance driver, a straight version of each of those, but they didn't have hardly any understable discs and no understable mid-ranges. And I thought this was surprising because honestly, understable mid-ranges are one of the best-selling types of discs on our website. On top of that, our understable mystery box, the Technician box, is also a bestseller. But hey, who am I to judge? Everyone has their own style. I was curious though what they threw for that type of shot, since they weren't bagging an understable mid-range, and they said they opted for overstable forehands instead, with either approach discs or fairway drivers to just get as far right as possible. Which hey, makes sense. You want a disc to go to the right, you throw a disc that can go to the right, however you can make that happen. But an overstable forehand shot isn't exactly the same as an understable mid-range. Here's my personal overstable approach disc, the Kastaplast Yarn. And boy, does it like to go right. But let's compare it to another of our understable mid-ranges, the Infinite Discs Khonsu. Named after the Egyptian moon god that you may have recently seen in Marvel's Moon Knight, its flight numbers of 55, -30 sound like it should be getting right quite a bit. Off the tee, Caleb gets it to flip up nicely. It moves off to the right, nice and smooth, and holds that smooth turn. And that's a great looking flight. Imagine a tightly wooded fairway and you're just peering a gap partway down that fairway. Fantastic. That shot is pretty hard to do though on an overstable forehand. The Yarn, for example, is finishing well shorter than that. And you can try to make that same shot with an overstable fairway like this Raptor that we tested in a video earlier in this series, but then you bring in a lot more speed and the potential for that disc to skip even further right. Now hey, sometimes that's the shot, but sometimes it isn't. And I don't think that we're seeing the exact same shape from an overstable forehand and an understable backhand. Understable mid-ranges, for example, are great at getting right, but then pushing further and further down that line to maybe open up the gap for your next shot. And they most certainly have a place in most players' bags. Speaking of place, that means the Khonsu needs to take its place on our graph, which is going to be right about here. And let's move on to our next understable mid-range, the Fuse. Now we've thrown the Fuse before in some of our straight mid-range tests, and we found it to be a little bit too understable. Rated at 5.6 -10, it's a tricky one. Lots of people love it as a straight mid-range, but it just never really fit in those tests for us. So we thought, why not try it here? But we don't just have one Fuse today, we have two. We have an Opto Ice Orbit Fuse, which is a stiff premium blend that's honestly one of my favorite looking plastics on the market right now. And we also have the Frost Fuse, which is a flexible rubbery blend designed to be used in colder temperatures. And if you happen to have watched our Throwing Every Trilogy Plastic Ever video, you know what's about to happen. The Opto Ice Orbit Fuse comes out on a slight hyzer, like all these throws will, and starts to turn over, but then just stops, holds straight, and fades out. While the Frost Fuse gets a lot more turn, which puts them here and here on our graph, nowhere near each other. And this is a good time to point out just how crucial plastic is in these sorts of situations. Shopping for a disc based on flight numbers can only get you so far. You need to ask around, maybe do some research and understand the differences between different plastics. Can you find something that has both the feel and stability that you're looking for? It's got to be out there somewhere. Let's move on though from the Fuse to something a little bit different. You see, we spend a lot of time in these series talking about how flight numbers don't match up with the disc, but we don't talk often about the disc type itself being wrong. Here's what I mean. This says it's a mid-range. You might be curious that it says it's a 3-speed, and then you might look at the profile and say, I'm pretty sure that's a putter. This is the Kang, manufactured by Yikun in China, the company behind Discmania's Active line. The Kang is a 3-speed quote-unquote mid-range, rated with 5 glide, -2 turn, and 0 fade. But is a disc a mid-range just because a manufacturer says so? Let's find out. Okay, maybe it is a mid-range. The Kang flies great, it flips up slowly, holds a gentle turn, and kind of fades forward for some pretty decent distance. I do think it feels and flies a lot more like a putter than a mid-range, but it earns a spot here on our graph. And I think it's time we play a little game. I'm going to show you 2 mid-ranges, and you tell me which one do you think has -3 turn. Is it this one? Or is it this one? Mid-range A or mid-range B? Okay, go ahead and cast your vote, and let's take a look at how they fly. Mid-range A on the left, and mid-range B on the right. And mid-range A is a Discraft Z-Flex Glow Soul rated at 4.5 -30, and mid-range B is a Castoplast K1 Svea rated at 5.6 -10. And if my eyes don't deceive me, the Castoplast Svea is a bit more understable than the Soul. Oh, flight numbers. Anyways, the Soul lands here, the Svea lands here, and next up is an understable mid-range from my own bag. It's the Buzz SS. Rated at 5.4 -21, the Buzz SS has actually made its way into my bag as a straight mid-range. But in different plastics, you can definitely expect different flights. And of course, everyone's different, so how will it fly for Caleb? Well, here this Z-Dye Buzz SS is nearly as straight as it is understable, getting a slow, smooth turn before an equally smooth fade. Very nice. But if you're looking to replace a forehand shot, the Buzz SS is probably not going to be your go-to. So it lands right about here on our graph, flying very far, but not very understable. And now let's take a look at a couple other discs that share the same -2 turn and 1 fade. Starting with this, the Lone Star BB6. Rated at 4.5 -21, the BB6 bears a striking resemblance to the Discraft Soul. But does it fly anything like the Soul? Well, if the Soul was in any other plastic today, probably. But that Z-Flex Glow is a little more overstable than most Souls. The BB6, though, is a very understable, quickly turning over from a hyzer release. However, it does get pretty decent distance. It's definitely one of the most understable discs we've tested so far, but let's see how it compares to the Jester Disc Golf Peace Train. Also rated at 5.4 -21, we tested the Peace Train in our first impressions series a couple months ago, and as you're about to see, we found it to be a little touchy when it comes to release angle. For example, thrown on a tiny hyzer, it flips up, holds a big turn before fading forward. Not bad. While on more hyzer, it only flips just past flat before fighting out for a straighter flight. We also threw one again while we were testing these mid-ranges, and it was a touch more overstable. It did fly pretty far though, so the Peace Train finds a spot here on our graph, and we'll move on to, you guessed it, another -21 disc, the MVP Detour. Finally available in stock Neutron plastic, MVP has added the Detour to the James Conrad line, with the Nomad, Detour, Terra, and Zenith. Rated at 5.5 -21, the Detour feels and looks quite a bit like the Meteor, but I'll tell you right now, it did not fly like our Meteor. Just look at it go. Now I want to point something out. Just because it flew really far to the right doesn't mean it was the most understable disc. In fact, quite the opposite. The fact that it pushed so far right and forward means that low speed stability was trying to kick in, and that opens up yet another shot shape for your bag. So the Detour lives up to its name, taking you perhaps not on the path you planned for, but instead the path that you needed. Now for our last -21 disc, it's the Doomsday Scavenger. Now, the Doomsday Scavenger doesn't really look or feel like any disc that we've seen so far. It's pretty deep, very domey, and in this premium isolation plastic, it's also very tacky and quite flexible. So with nearly the same numbers as the Buzz SS, the BB6, the Peace Train, and the Detour, surely you would expect the Scavenger to also have at least a little turn to it. Okay, all right. That was a little high. Let's try again. Okay. Well, the Scavenger is easily the least understable disc we tested all day, and certainly has the least accurate flight numbers so far, probably more deserving, in this case, of a 0-2, which would put it way over here on our graph. Let's see if our next disc, though, can get back on track with expectations. Here we have the Discmania Origin. This is the Signature Series version Midnight Prowl for Kyle Klein from a couple of years ago. And I will admit I've been bagging this one for a while, but I promise you, this is how it flew when it was brand new as well. So if the Scavenger was way more stable than expected, the Origin also doesn't meet expectations and is way more understable because it's rated at 5.5 -1.1. So it's going to find its place here on our graph. And that leaves us with these 5 discs with a combined -19 turn between them. Pretty sure we're going to find our most understable mid-range right here. Let's get started. With the Discraft Stratus. The Stratus is the oldest mold we're testing today, approved by the PDGA way back in 1997. It's mostly out of production these days, beyond the limited run Ledgestone editions produced every year or two. This year's edition looks pretty good in ESP Swirl. They also feel pretty fantastic too. But will they live up to the flight numbers of 5.4 -4.1? Okay, whoa, all right. So eventually the Stratus shows that turn, but it certainly took its time. This being the latest turn that we've seen from any disc so far. The Stratus flips to flat, holds there for a very long time, before finally breaking right. And this is again just one of those moments that I'm always excited about in this Flight Numbers Don't Matter series. On paper, looking at flight numbers, you only get a tiny, blurry snapshot of how a disc might fly. But when you get out and start throwing and comparing, things become clear, and you start to learn these little fine details about discs that you just can't know from shopping by flight numbers. So big shout out to the Stratus for reminding us how important it is to get out and throw some discs and not assume that they're going to fly a certain way. It's going to find a spot here on our graph, and we move on to another disc with -4 turn and 1 fade, and one 26 years younger. It's the Innova Rollo. Approved in 2023, the Rollo is rated at 5.6 -4.1 and is definitely unique in shape compared to any of the discs we've tested. It has a sharp, pointed wing, but turned down, and a very low parting line gives it a nice domey feel in the hand. Innova marketed the Rollo as a roller disc for anyone. So let's see if they're right. Caleb throws it with not too much power and on just a little bit of hyzer, and not only does it flip up and turn, but even though it looks like it's coming in for a cut roller, as soon as it hits the ground, it quickly stands up and gets a nice forward roll to add another 50 to 70 feet, and even finishes slightly right, which makes the Rollo one of our most understable discs for sure, but also some pretty solid distance. But even the Rollo doesn't quite make the top 3 because we have 2 honorable mentions before we declare our winner. The first honorable mention is going to go to the Axiom Paradox. Now, in a lighter weight or maybe neutron plastic, the Paradox might easily be the most understable mid-range, period. But still, with flight numbers of 5.4 -4.0, you can actually count on the Paradox to turn every time. What's impressive though is that it doesn't burn out immediately. At least not in this Proton soft plastic from the OTB Open Paradox. Like we talked about earlier, plastic plays a huge role, and in other blends, the Paradox would be even more understable. So it'll find its home way over here on our graph, and we'll move on to honorable mention number 2, the Divergent Discs Leviathan. Now, if you've been watching our channel for any amount of time, you've probably seen some of our other experiences with divergent discs. But are these shots crazy, or are they just discs that are not made for an MA1 player that throws 400 plus feet of power and torque? Probably the latter. Either way, we have another one today, the Leviathan, which is rated at 5.4 -4.0, and we once again have it in this rubbery max grip plastic, weighing in around 160 to 165 grams. And let's be clear, these discs are marketed towards beginners. But let's see how Caleb handles it. On a standard golf line, it flips over quickly, gets a pretty significant cut roll off to the left. Not the most useful shot. On more of a distance line, it flips over, keeps on turning, and hits edge to roll. But the direction it rolled seemed very random. We had some go left, some go right. It was kind of all over the place. But what you really want to do with this disc is just get crazy and have some fun. Thrown very high and very hyzer, it still somehow comes back. I will admit I could not see it at all when it was up in the air, so traced it as best I could, but lo and behold, it reappears, and right there is the most fun way to throw 350 feet. So a very honorable mention to the Leviathan, which finds a place somewhere over here on the graph, which takes us to our most uncontrollably understable disc we tested today, the Lone Star Lone Wolf. Yep, that's right. You probably didn't see this one coming. The meat hook specialists themselves, Lone Star, have somehow produced a disc so understable, we're not really sure if it's usable, although I'm sure somebody could use it. This was definitely a surprise to me. The Lone Wolf isn't rated as super crazy understable. I mean, -3, but as we've seen today, that doesn't really matter. It even claims to have one fade. But let me ask you, does this look like one fade to you? Basically max weight, 175 grams, Bravo plastic. It's just so almost unusably understable. Most Lone Star discs are more overstable than the flight numbers, and by quite a bit. So it's definitely a surprise, even for a disc that says it's going to be understable, to be this understable. So there you have it, our finished graph of very understable mid-ranges, with the Lone Star Lone Wolf taking its place somewhere over here on the right-hand side. And we hope you enjoyed. If you saw a mid-range that you liked in this video, why don't you head on over to sixsidediscs.com, where, while supplies last, you can purchase these mid-ranges that we tested and take 10% off because they're lightly used. What do you throw for an understable mid-range? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what flight numbers we should test next. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Now, as I was working on this video, I was talking to somebody. Let's move on from the fuse to something a little bit different. It did fly really far though, so the P strain finds its home here on our graph, and we have another disc with a -4 turn and negative.
All right, let's get crazy with this one.
We got the Leviathan. If you need like a 300-foot shot, you can just have some fun with it.
I think it's called Shoot the Moon.
Shoot the moon. Yeah, it's pretty much just a crazy. Look at that thing turning. It's a great 300-foot shot where you just, you know, you can trust it to turn over like that. You can also put it 150 feet in the air. So.
Today, we're testing over 25 11-speed drivers, like the new Drive and the Latitude 64 Grace, to see how they match up to the Innova Wraith. Why? Because the Wraith can fly like this. Today's video is sponsored by Disc Golf Swag. More about them a little later. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. Why don't more people throw the Wraith? Well, Greg, I'm glad you asked that question. Because of the Innova Destroyer. The Destroyer is one of the most popular discs in the history of our sport. While Innova's sponsored players like Calvin Heimberg have thrown the Destroyer as their go-to maximum distance driver for decades, the more important clue to its quality is that nearly every pro that throws an open bag chooses to use a Destroyer. There's no denying its greatness, but there was a short period of time, from 2005 to 2007, when the Wraith reigned supreme. The Innova Wraith was approved in 2005, and they describe it as the original wide-rimmed distance driver, which might be a clue to how and why we ended up with the Destroyer in the first place. You see, the Wraith is a more forgiving and controllable disc than your average Destroyer, making it much better for amateurs, lower arm speeds, or even tailwind drives, when a Destroyer might be too overstable. So I ask again, why don't more people throw the Wraith? Well, as it turns out, they do. and with good reason. One of our subscribers, Zach, put the Wraith through its paces in a couple different plastics for us. His DX Wraith was really flippy, turning aggressively, hitting the ground around 280 feet, and rolling straight to almost 500 on this finely cut surface. While his seasoned beat-in Star Wraith, thrown flat and hard, gets a smooth turn before a late but reliable fade. And demonstrating the wide variety of stabilities, his new Halo Wraith is super overstable. On the same angle as the Star Wraith, it just fades out aggressively. Thanks again to Zach for sending in those clips. If you'd like to be featured in one of our future videos, follow us on social media or join our Discord at the link in the description. Zach isn't the only one out there enjoying his Wraiths. While the excitement and buzz of every new Destroyer release makes all the headlines, the Wraith is quietly the best-selling disc of all time at Infinite Discs. For whatever reason, it doesn't quite get the attention it deserves, but maybe it would if it had some beautiful custom artwork like this from today's sponsor, Disc Golf Swag. Flight numbers may not always matter, but as the saying goes, pretty discs fly further. Maybe that's something we should test in the future. With Disc Golf Swag, you can get any image printed onto select discs. Their prints have excellent detail and are durable and fade resistant. With a limited stock of Discraft, Innova, and MVP, there's some great discs to choose from. You can upload any image on their website and get an instant proof of how it would look on your disc, fast shipping, and no minimums. You can learn more at discgolfswag.com or at the link in the video description, and a huge thanks to Disc Golf Swag for supporting our channel. Now, back to the Wraith. We'll be throwing this pretty Wraith and all the rest of these discs in central Ohio, around 800 feet of elevation, and the conditions today were a toasty 88 degrees Fahrenheit, very humid, and a slight 5 to 10 mile per hour tailwind. Remember, in a tailwind, discs are going to get a little less glide and typically fly a little bit more overstable. Now again, the ideal Wraith flight in calm conditions should look something like this. A slight drift to the right, but a reliable fade for easy distance. And we have 3 different Wraiths to throw today, beginning with our custom printed Star Wraith. This Star Wraith is max weight around 175 grams and has just a slight dome. And in today's tailwind, it had quite a bit of overstability. But to show what a little bit of use can do for a Wraith, we have a slightly beat-in Star Wraith. And even in this tailwind, it flips over almost immediately, getting a smooth turn to the right before a nice fade forward for an easy 350 feet. Now, as we've talked about in many different videos, plastic plays a huge role in how a disc flies. So while the Star Wraith is rated at 11.5 -1.3, so is this DX Wraith. And if ours flies anything like Zach's did, well, say it with me, flight numbers don't matter. Okay, let's move on and get to testing some of these other discs. Beginning with another disc made by Innova, but for a different company, it's the Infinite Discs Tsar. The Tsar is described by Infinite as a more overstable Wraith, though it's rated with the exact same flight numbers of 11.5 -1.3. However, most Innova fans online agree that it's using the old T-Rex mold, which has very different flight numbers of 11.404. So let's see just how overstable it is. First up, we have 2 iBlend Tsars. Purple is max weight and a very minimal dome, while the pink one here is 168 grams and very domey. And interestingly, they are a little bit different in the air. The heavier purple Tsar flips up from a slight hyzer, slowly drifts right before it fades out, while the pink Tsar on a similar hyzer angle doesn't flip up at all. Instead, it rides that hyzer angle, albeit without an aggressive fade, for a nice smooth flight. We also have another pair of Tsars, one S-Blend and one Halo S-Blend. Now, iBlend, S-Blend, and Halo S-Blend aren't all that different in feel, but they are different in 2 important ways: price and stability. iBlend discs usually run around $15 retail, while S-Blend will be pushing $20 to $22, and Halo S-Blend $25 and up. Now remember, these are all made by Innova, so S-Blend is basically Star Plastic, Halo S-Blend is Halo Star, but iBlend doesn't have like a direct comparison these days at Innova. It might be comparable to Pro Plastic, which would explain why it's a little bit less expensive. But after saying all of that, this particular S-Blend Tsar is super understable. on basically the same line and angle as that purple iBlend one we saw, it quickly flips over and even gets over in cut rolls. But rest assured, some things are always true, like Halo plastic being much more overstable. This Halo S-Blend Czar is beef. This, though, I think is a good moment to reflect on. Here we have 4 discs, all the same mold, 3 different plastics, different weights, and very different flight paths. It's obviously another opportunity for me to say flight numbers don't matter, but what I mean by that is do your own research. You need to get out there and test some of these discs and plastics. See if there is a difference for you in a flat disc versus a domey disc. See how much the weight affects the flight path for you. And don't just blindly accept that flight numbers from one manufacturer mean the same thing that they do from another. All right, let's get back in the action now with yet another disc made by Innova for someone else. This time, the Millennium Astra. And again, we have 2 Astras. This time, exactly the same plastic, but different runs and very different profiles. These are both Quantum Metal Flake, which is Innova's champion metal flake plastic. But while the stock Astra here has a nice dome, our custom Flight Numbers Don't Matter stamp, available now at sixsideddiscs.com, is board flat. Now, before we throw these, we need to again talk about Innova manufacturing discs for other companies and using mismatched top and bottom molds from their own line of discs. The Astra, according to someone from Team Millennium that we've talked to, is the same mold as the Innova Archon. And it's generally agreed that an Archon is a combination of the Vulcan top mold and the Wraith bottom mold. And the flight numbers are only slightly changed from the Wraith or Czar at 11.5, -1.2. So what will that all mean for how it flies? Well, the flat custom stamped Astra is super overstable, showing no turn at all, and a substantial fade. While the domey stock Astra has maybe one of the best looking flights I've seen in a while. A smooth but subtle turn, and a smooth but moderate fade. That is how you get accurate distance. Now, if you've followed this series, you've probably seen me cook up some complex charts comparing discs to each other, but I feel like this is such a large sample size and the differences are so subtle. So instead, we're going to hand out some superlatives, like you see in your high school yearbooks, to help summarize the difference between some of these discs. So stick around to the end if you want to catch those. Next up, let's move on to Lone Star and one of their best-selling distance drivers, the Nimitz. Sharing the same flight numbers as the Wraith, the Nimitz typically has a slight dome, and we have 2 both in Bravo plastic and only 1 gram different at 172 and 173 respectively. The red Nimitz here gets a slight turn before fading out, a very similar flight to that domey Astra. While the blue Nimitz is put on a little bit more hyzer and a little bit higher, so it holds straight rather than turning before fading out. And I think that shows why the Nimitz is one of the best-selling Lone Star discs. 2 discs with almost the same flight numbers are the Discraft Drive and the Latitude 64 Grace. Representing arguably the 2 best FPO players of the last 10 years, no offense to Katrina Allen, Kristin Tattar's Grace has been flying off the shelf since its release a couple years ago, while 5-time world champion Paige Pierce has had a couple popular releases in her line, including the Fierce and Passion. Today we're comparing 2 Graces, the Grand Orbit Grace, which got just the faintest of turns before a big fade, and then the Stock Grace, which got a bit more smooth turn and then a reliable fade. And then looking at the new ESP Drive side by side with the stock Grace, and if that's not the best way to say that the Drive is a viable alternative to the Grace, I don't know what is. Because those flights look almost exactly the same. Next, let's take a look at another 11-speed driver from Discraft, the Surge. Rated at 11.5, -1.3, the Surge was approved back in 2006 and was even discontinued for a while a few years ago before Chandler Fry convinced Discraft to make it his Tour Series disc, right before he moved on to Infinite Discs and ThoughtSpace a year later. Off the tee, the Surge doesn't quite show the -1 turn, but it very much shows that 3 fade, making it one of the most overstable discs that we've tested so far. But it certainly wasn't the most overstable disc we found, and for that, we have to take a look at the 4 discs we have from MVP. Starting with the James Conrad Zenith in plasma plastic. Rated at 11.5, negative 0.52, the Zenith was the 3rd disc in the James Conrad line, and his first distance driver since joining MVP. And it's no surprise that the Zenith was a priority for the Conrad line, seeing as one of his favorite drivers while he was at Innova was the Wraith. Off the tee, the Zenith holds straight, and straight, and straight, and finally fades out for an excellent straight flight. Compared to the other 11-speed driver from MVP, the Photon, the Zenith might be a slightly more beginner-friendly option. Because even at just 151 grams, this Fission Photon is crazy overstable. Was it the most overstable that we tested? Maybe, but the next disc from MVP wasn't far off either. Although when I say MVP, what I mean is Axiom. The Defy from Axiom is rated at 11.5, negative 1.53 in fission plastic, but we also have one in neutron plastic rated at 11.5, negative 1.3. The Fission Defy probably fits in somewhere between the crazy overstability of the Photon and the easygoing Zenith. It thinks about flipping up, but instead goes from slow fade to big fade. But in neutron plastic, even at a measly 159 grams, it's still super overstable. Maybe not quite as much as that Fission Photon, but not far off either. So that has the very overstable side of the spectrum covered pretty thoroughly thanks to MVP. Let's shift gears though and look at some 11-speed drivers that perhaps you haven't heard of. And first up is the XCOM discs Libra. XCOM is a newer manufacturer that we're going to be exploring in depth soon. They're from China, and their origins actually come from Ultimate prior to their entry into the disc golf market. Now though, they have a full line of discs including the Libra, rated at 11.5, negative 1.2, which of course are just the flight numbers we want to test. But I have to say, that is not the flight that we were expecting. That is way more understable than the flight numbers would suggest. But this got me wondering, XCOM has another 11-speed driver with more understable flight numbers? So what if maybe, well, could it? And wouldn't you know it, flight numbers don't matter strikes again. I had wondered if maybe these discs were stamped incorrectly, but the embossing on the bottom clearly shows that the XCOM Leo is a Leo and the Libra is a Libra, but for whatever reason, their stabilities are sort of flip-flopped. At least when we threw them. I guess we'll have to wait and learn more when we explore XCOM in more detail in a few weeks. But until then, let's move on to another disc featured in an upcoming video, the Discmania S-Line DD1. Oh, no, sorry. This is the Disco S-Line GD1. That's my mistake. So the S-Line DD1 is an 11.5 negative 1.2 distance driver from Discmania. The S-Line GD1 is an 11.5 negative 1.2 distance driver from Disco. DD obviously stands for distance driver. GD stands for something. Anyways, let's see how the Discmania Disco S-Line DD1 GD1 flies. And, well, which is which? Because they both fly pretty straight. The GD1 with a slight turn, and the DD1 with a more consistently straight flight, but before they both fade out. Similar discs, similar stamps, similar flights. It's almost like it wasn't an accident at all. Anyways, let's see one more Lone Star driver, the Lone Star Curl. Rated at 11.5, negative 1.2, the Curl is also one of Lone Star's best sellers, even though it still has very similar flight numbers to the Nimitz. But everything about the Curl is smoother than the Nimitz. Smoother rim, smoother wing, smoother turn, smoother fade. Smooth. Okay, just 5 discs to go, and let's speed it up because this is probably the most discs we've ever compared in one video. So let's take a look at number 5, the Yikun Jun in their new Phoenix Star plastic, which feels like a more premium plastic than their regular Phoenix blend. It's rated at 11.5, -1.2, and almost actually flies like it. Maybe just a little more understable than -1 turn. It does work hard to fight out though. There's some fade in there somewhere. Number 4 and number 3 are essentially the exact same disc. The ThoughtSpace Ethereal Animus and the Mint Discs Sublime Longhorn, with ever so slightly different flight numbers of 11.502 for the Animus and 11.4 -1 2.5 for the Longhorn. They look and feel nearly identical. Both are manufactured by MVP, both are in their respective versions of plasma plastic, and both are overstable. No turn, no flip. And let's finish with our last 2 discs, something completely different and differenter. The Prodigy Air Spectrum H3V2 and the Viking Ragnarok. Now you might not think that these 2 discs have a whole lot in common. The wing design is very different from the Ragnarok to the H3V2. But our history with Viking discs tells us that these flight numbers may not be telling the whole story. And my personal experience with the H3V2 tells us that this could be a big turning showdown. So let's see which one turns best. The H3V2 flips up from hyzer, quickly turns over, and swoops out before finding some late low-speed fade. While the Viking Ragnarok gets up, gets turning, and never ever stops. So that puts an end to our list on a pretty understable note. Let's hand out some well-deserved superlatives to some of these discs. The most likely to succeed, for beginners, is the Viking Ragnarok. We were very impressed with its turn, which will make it a great Wraith-style driver for lower arm speeds. Most likely to succeed, for power throwers, the Halo S-Blend Tsar. Or probably like the latest Halo Wraith on the market, those take forever to beat in. Most likely to tell your joke, again, right after you did, but slightly louder and not as funny, the Disco GD1, for reasons. The most likely to ruin a vegan's birthday party, well, that's got to be the beefcake, that is the MVP Fission Photon. Most likely to turn right when you say go left, it's the XCOM Libra. Most attractive stamp has to go to the XCOM Leo, even though it wasn't supposed to be part of this test in the first place. Most attractive full color print has to go to the Disc Golf Swag Wraith, for obvious reasons. And finally, most likely to surprise you in the best way possible, the Lone Star Curl. Going into this comparison, I never would have guessed that the Lone Star Curl would be one of the best 11-speed drivers, but it was just so smooth. And before we end, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that came out to Idlewild. We had a fantastic time. We gave away all 100 Velcro patches, and you all were super gracious. We really appreciate that. We signed autographs, which is kind of crazy, took pictures, shook hands, and just had a wonderful time. So if you could make it, I hope you had a great time. And if you couldn't, thanks for your kind messages anyways. It means a lot to have all of your support. What's your favorite 11-speed Wraith-like driver? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what flight numbers we should explore next. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. There's no denying its greatness, but there was a short time from 2005 to 2007 while and we have 3 different Wraiths to compare to that. While the Pink Tsar on a Next up though, let's compare a disc and if that's the but it certainly wasn't the most overstable disc we found. For that, we're going to have to take a look at our MVP discs. Which of these mid-ranges flies farthest? An overstable one? An understable one? Maybe something in between. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, and we are going to find out which of these 34 mid-ranges can quite literally go the distance. Today's video is sponsored by Ocean Discs. More on them in just a bit. These 34 mid-ranges also represent the most discs we've ever tested in one video. But to be honest, some of them don't realistically have a chance at flying the farthest. At least we don't think they do. For example, this is the Innova DX Condor, a superclass mid-range weighing in at 200 grams. And I included it because my son just happened to have it in his collection. And there was room for one more mid-range in the bin. Does it really have a chance to compete here? Not at all. Thrown on a slight hyzer, it actually holds that angle, pushing forward and finishing with a respectable 341 feet. But 341 feet is not even close to making the cut, so the DX Condor is out. Team Six Sided Discs Caleb Thomas is going to be throwing all of these mid-ranges in central Ohio with a very faint tailwind, maybe 5 miles an hour, on a slightly downhill fairway, so keep that in mind for our distances. Oh, and by the way, 6-speed mid-ranges are out. The CAX from Castoplast or the Stig or the Squall from DGA are a little too much of a driver to fit into our test, so we're going to stick to 4 and 5-speed mid-ranges. While the Innova Condor didn't have the distance to challenge for the win, a disc that has some respectable distance is the Clash Discs Barry. In steady plastic, the Barry's rated at 5.5, -1.1, and it's one of many straight mid-ranges that we're going to be testing today. Hailing from Finland, Clash Discs has some excellent plastic, so let's see if the Barry can set a solid benchmark. From a slight hyzer, the Barry flips up to flat, but only for a split second, before gliding and fading its way to the current distance to beat, 382 feet. But in the world of mid-ranges, is distance everything? Not exactly. To illustrate that for us, we'll need a word from today's sponsor, Ocean Discs. The Ocean Discs Sea Turtle released just last week, and it's the first ever disc golf disc made using 60% recycled ocean waste plastic. Available in 3 different plastics, their base Ocean Waste Marine, Premium Ocean Waste Pacific, and Swirly Atlantic. The Sea Turtle is rated at 5.5, -1.1 in their base blend, and 5.5, 0.1 in the premium plastics. And to prove that we don't show any favoritism towards our sponsors, the Sea Turtles registered distances of 330 and 327 feet respectively. But the Sea Turtle wasn't designed for distance. The Sea Turtle was designed for accurate shot shaping. It was designed to have a smooth, controllable flight path, to help you navigate tight-wooded fairways and hit gaps with ease. The Ocean Discs Sea Turtle is available at sixsideddiscs.com while supplies last. And when we run out, you can find a list of participating retailers on Ocean Discs' website. Both links are in the video description. Huge thanks to Ocean Discs for once again supporting our channel. Grab a Sea Turtle today in ocean waste plastic and start making waves in the world of disc golf. Now let's see another of our straight mid-ranges, the Prodigy M4. Rated at 5.5, -1.1, the M4, at least in our previous experiences, has been pretty understable, typically turning over easily, but having a little fade at the end. Today though, our M4 never had a chance, but for a different reason. This blend of M4 that we got for our upcoming Mystery Challenge is surprisingly more overstable than many we've tested before. It resists flipping up from hyzer, and despite a couple other efforts, we couldn't improve on this 368-foot shot. Next, let's see a disc that we have pretty high hopes for. It's the Discmania Metal Flake C-Line MD1, or in other words, the Mindbender. One of the last hurrahs before Simon Lizotte's departure from Discmania, the Mindbender was a massive hit with fans and has quickly become a highly sought-after collector disc. Its straight, neutral stability made it a popular woods disc, but what kind of distance can it get? Well, some distance is the answer. From a slight hyzer, it gives us a fairly straight flight with some low-speed fade. And while this may not look like the best pure distance line, we threw each of these discs no less than 3 times, and this was the best flight that we could get from the Mindbender. And it's good enough to put up the new number to beat, 396 feet. But will our next disc be the first to break 400? It's the Trash Panda Dune. This dune is from a recent run of max weight premium dunes that we got, weighing in at 175 grams. It's flexible, domey, and it goes. Flipping up slowly, it finds a super straight drift before some late fade, and it indeed does take us past the 400-foot mark, just barely, to 404. So we know our eventual winner is going to be over 400 feet, but by how much? Well, let's see if a disc designed by a winner can beat the Dune. It's the Prodigy Archive. Here today in 400 Plastic, the Archive is the signature mid-range of two-time world champion Isaac Robinson. And this is actually one of 3 mid-ranges we're throwing today that's from my own bag. I personally use the Archive as an overstable mid-range, but how far can it fly? Well, maybe we should have tried one in 500 Plastic, because this one tapped out just past 400, equaling the 404 feet of the Dune. With the tie at the top, let's take a moment and see what one overstable and one understable midrange can do against what have so far mostly been straight midranges. Both from Axiom, we have the Prism Proton Pyro and Neutron Paradox. And this is a great opportunity to talk about how we're approaching this whole thing. Obviously, we can't throw these 2 discs the same way to get maximum distance. If we throw the Pyro on Hyzer, we're just going to see that overstability dump it down to the ground. Similarly, if we throw the Paradox on Anhyzer, we're going to get a roller, so we need to find the right release angle for each disc. Therefore, for the discs you've already seen, and for the rest we'll be seeing, Caleb is adjusting his angle, power, and aim to try and get the best distance straight down this fairway. Let's go ahead and see that Pyro, which at maximum power on maybe a slight Anhyzer, not Caleb's preferred release, it almost immediately starts to fight back, fades out, and only reaches about 375 feet. But hey, let's give it the best chance we can. Caleb decides to go for a 360 full power rip on our other Pyro, and despite the extra rotation and oomph, it goes a whopping 1 foot farther to 376 feet. But maybe the Paradox can do better. From a very steep hyzer on quite a bit of power, Caleb puts it high left and it quickly flips over and slowly turns. But despite this huge flight, it finishes 5 feet shorter than the Pyro at 371 feet. And that explains why, so far at least, our farthest flying discs have all been straight to slightly overstable mid-ranges. But will that trend continue? Let's find out with another understable midrange, the Thought Space Mana. Rated at 5.5, -2.1, and essentially the same mold as the Mint Discs Lobster or the Jester Peace Train, the Mana is typically a reliably understable midrange. And I should know, because this one is mine, though it's not in my bag anymore. For players with reliable power, not me, it should turn without issue. So, will it for Caleb? It sure will. From hyzer, the Mana flips up, turns over, and holds a smooth turn, and keeps on gliding, and finds its way all the way to a new best distance to beat of 408 feet. So from one disc made by MVP for Thought Space to one made for themselves, let's take a look at the Detour. The MVP Detour, rated at 5.5, -2.1 as well, is a straight to understable midrange from the James Conrad line. The one that we're testing today is a Gyropalooza Detour from late last year in Neutron plastic, weighing in at 177 grams. And in our understable midrange comparison just a couple months ago, the Detour flew super far, so we have high hopes. Today, the Detour flipped up to flat, and held, and held, and held, and that must be where it found the distance, because it fades out quite a bit late on. But it makes it all the way out to 415 feet. And just like that, we have a new score to beat. Let's see if the Detour can hold on to that crown a little bit longer than the Mana did. First up to try and take its place are two midranges made by Innova, the Infinite Discs Chariot and the Discmania MD3. The Infinite Discs Chariot is, for all intents and purposes, the new version of the MD3. Now, to be clear, Discmania does have a new version of the MD3 that's all their own, but this one is an old MD3 made by Innova, with the old flight numbers of 5502, while the Chariot is rated at 5501. Let's begin with the Chariot, which flips up to flat and holds there for quite a while before some low speed fade, while the MD3 flips over, holds a nice slow drift before finishing straight. So which one do we think went farther? Well, you might be surprised to hear that the MD3 could only manage 360 feet, while the Chariot pushed all the way out to 388 feet. Now, I've seen Eagle McMahon blast an MD3 in the past well over 500 feet, but obviously he's superhuman or something, and not all of us can throw mid-ranges 500 feet. And for Caleb, these two never really showed enough potential to reach the top of our leaderboard. Next up though, let's see two mid-ranges made by Innova for themselves. It's the Mako 3 and the J. The Mako 3 is a straight mid-range rated at 5500, while the J is somewhat similar at 5401. In fact, now that I have the time to really look at it, I think the J is the old MD3 mold, because boy does it look similar. I guess we'll see how it flies compared to the other MD3s, but first, let's see the Mako 3. Today we have it in G-Star plastic, and from hyzer, it flips up to flat, starts to fade, but eventually shows some late turn, pushing all the way out to 382 feet. Not bad. But the J, on the other hand, I don't know. It didn't fly anything like we expected. Nothing really like the MD3 or the Chariot. It got a lot of turn, but no glide. And on every throw, it just kind of dropped out of the air. Its best distance was only 322 feet. Weird. So that's a few discs now that didn't even come close to passing the detour. So let's take a short break and play a little mini game. This is the Total Eclipse Hexalotl from Halloween 2023. It's one of the most sought after runs of Hex from Axiom, and we threw it 3 times today. Here's the game though. In a moment, I want you to pause the video and take a guess in the comments below of how many total feet of difference do you think there were between each of the throws with the Hex. For example, if we threw it 400, 420, and 380 feet, you'd put 40 feet as your guess. And welcome back. Now, no cheating. Don't enter your comment after we show you, all right? We're on the honor system here today. Here's throw number 1 with the Hex, coming in at 381 feet. Throw number 2 with the Hex comes in at 380 feet. And finally, throw number 3 comes in with 380 feet. The Total Eclipse Hex was unbelievably consistent. A literal 1 foot difference from all 3 throws. How'd you do on the minigame? Reply to your comment below to let us know. And while the Total Eclipse Hex didn't blow us away with distance, it certainly impressed with consistency. But what about a Proton Soft Hex? Well, strangely, this Proton Hex didn't have much oomph today. Despite Caleb's best efforts, it was only able to put up a distance of 364 feet. So let's move on from that slight disappointment to our first disc from Discraft, the Buzz SS. But not just any Buzz SS. This is a 12-year-old Z Buzz SS from our local A tier, the Brent Hambrick Memorial Open. This Buzz SS has been on my shelf for a couple of years, but it's still in great condition, and I think it has a real chance of putting up a solid number. So let's see what Caleb can do with it. On his first throw on a slight hyzer, it turned over and held a smooth turn. And even with a late fade forward, it just didn't have quite enough steam and finished at 383 feet. On his second throw, he managed a little more distance despite the added height, and it held on for 401 feet. But Caleb saved the best for last. On the third throw, he got the perfect hyzer angle and nose angle. It flips to flat, gets a slow drift, and fights back forward late on, and puts up the new number to beat, 418 feet. Now that may only be 3 feet past the detour, but farther is farther. Now I want you to take a moment and think of a mid-range that could match that, 418 feet. That's a long ways, and you're probably thinking that mid-range would be max weight or close to it, probably premium plastic, aerodynamic, from a well-known established brand that you and all your friends already throw. Yep, you guessed right. It's the XCOM Gemini in Earth base plastic. Oh, you didn't guess that. But yeah, look at this. Not only did the Gemini equal 418 feet on this throw, but on this one, it did 417 feet. And on this one, 408, giving it the best average distance of any disc we tested all day. Wow. Now, if you want to know more about the Gemini, check out our first impressions video that we did on XCOM a couple weeks ago. In that video, you'll also learn a little more about our next disc, the XCOM Virgo. Here in their Mars Premium Plastic, the Virgo is a beautiful disc, and as we established in that XCOM First Impressions video, its flight numbers are wrong. A few of you commented on the video with a very compelling theory, and I think you're right. It seems that their turn and fade numbers are backwards. So while the Virgo is rated at 4502, it should actually be 45-20, which, based on the discs that have flown the farthest for us so far, I think it has a chance. Or does it? Because this was the best throw that we got with the Virgo, and it didn't really seem to have much more to offer, finishing at 401 feet. Respectable, but not a contender. And that same thing can be said for the next couple discs, including the Castaplast Iota. Now, to be clear, I don't mind the Iota at all. It has an unusual shape, but I've seen some incredible shots with it in the past. That being said, things don't always go according to plan when we make these videos. I'm sure many of you have seen the bloopers at the end. You get it. Caleb struggled to get a clean release with the Iota all 3 times. And on top of that, it was much more overstable than expected. And therefore, the best distance we got was just 288 feet. Respectable, but not a contender. Next up, the Lone Star Texas Ranger. Rated at 55-11, and in their stiff alpha plastic, it feels pretty nice. It has the same flight numbers as some of the best discs we've seen so far, but this was our best shot with it, reaching just 354 feet. And that's with a big skip too. So, respectable, but not a contender. So what about a couple mid-ranges from Discraft? Surely they stand a chance of delivering. Like this Discraft Metallic Z Comet. Nope, the Comet could only deliver 380 feet. What about the Meteor from Discraft? I've seen some good shots with the Meteor. Nope, the Meteor had an even more disappointing showing. Once again, for whatever reason, it just wasn't holding any glide or distance, coming in much shorter than the Comet at 362 feet. But of course, the Discraft fans are waiting for me to say it. The Buzz. Surely the Buzz can deliver, right? Well, I regret to inform all of you that our Buzz was bitterly disappointing. So much so that I asked Caleb to throw it a 4th and 5th time. And even though all of us have seen Drew Gibson smash a Buzz over 500 feet, just like Eagle McMahon with that MD3 earlier, it just wasn't to be today for the Buzz, finishing out at just 386 feet. But fear not, Discraft fans, because redemption has arrived in the form of the Buzz SS. Yep, you heard me right. Yes, I know there was a Buzz SS earlier, and it's still the current co-leader, but what else would you use to beat a Buzz SS than another Buzz SS? This Z-Die Buzz SS is straight out of my own bag, and I love it. And here's why. On its second throw, the Z-Die Buzz SS delivers for Discraft and mid-ranges everywhere with this gem of a shot, reaching the new distance to beat, 420 feet. So with 6 mid-ranges left, the Buzz SS is back on top, but can it hold on? Going into this whole test, there were some discs we really expected to do well that didn't, like the Buzz, MD3, or Hex. And some we had pretty low expectations for that really overperformed, like the Gemini or the Mana. But these next 2 discs are complete unknowns for us, because these are from Legacy discs. Say hello to the Ghost and the Gauge. Rated at 4503 and 5501 respectively, they are both in Pinnacle Plastic, a tacky, translucent premium blend, and both are close to max weight at 178 grams. And it's been quite a while since we tested some Legacy discs, so let's see what they're all about. Side by side, the Gauge turns over easily, while the Ghost is super beefy. Oh, it's actually the other way around. The Ghost that's rated super overstable turned right over every time we threw it, while the Gauge, rated kind of straight at 5501, had a huge fade every time. I'm a big fan of Legacy plastic. I even bagged a Badger for a while, but the Gauge at 387 and the Ghost at 313 feet maybe didn't quite show us their best today. Perhaps our only mid-range from Dynamic Discs will do a little bit better. It's the EMAC Truth. Rated at 5502, this Lucid Glimmer EMAC Truth was actually featured in a previous video. We know it has some stability, so the idea here was for Caleb to really give it the beans, and maybe it could get some distance, but no, it was just too overstable, barely passing 320 feet. Let's take a look at a couple mid-ranges from Latitude 64, starting with another one I've tried for myself and the straightest mid-range we've ever thrown, the Opto Claymore. Rated at 55, -11, the Claymore was indeed the straightest mid-range in our straight mid-range test last year, and for good reason, because even today it was still super straight. But we're not testing how straight these are, so did straight equal distance? Well, it sure did. 413 feet on our leaderboard. On to our next to last disc, and it's not the one you're thinking of. It is the Pearl. Yep, the easy to throw lines mid-range at just 158 grams and -4 turn. The Pearl is included here simply because I happened to get this one at Idlewild and I was just curious how it would fly. And I thought it would be fun to throw, and it was. Just look at these lines. Caleb's having a blast.
That might be it, dude. I think that might have skipped over the edge. That was nuts.
Oh no!
Oh, might have died too fast.
I think it did.
Yeah.
It's still in contention though.
But it was this shot here that delivered the new farthest throw, 421 feet. 1 foot farther. But surely we're not going to let 158 gram beginner friendly mid-range win this whole thing, are we? I mean, as if it's up to us, but thankfully there was one disc that decided to take matters into its own hands and fly much farther. Before I tell you what that disc is though, think about all 33 mid-ranges you've already seen. What's missing? What mid-range is gonna top this list? And keep thinking about that while you watch this.
I went left to right with this, I think.
That's gonna go far. That's going real far.
And listen now while I tell you that this 433 foot shot was with a Discmania Origin. This Discmania Origin is the very first edition of the Midnight Prowl, a Kyle Klein Creator Series signature disc. And again, it's one of the ones that's been living in my bag for a little bit. So maybe the fact that it's slightly beat in gave it an advantage here. It's hard to say. But nevertheless, big congratulations to the Discmania Origin. Now, I'm sure you all thought of some mid-ranges that we didn't test today, so leave a comment below and tell us which ones we need to include in a future test. But before we move on, I need to say a big thank you and shout out to Caleb today for his effort on this video and the video that you're going to see next week. We don't normally shoot videos going for distance, and we happen to shoot 2 back-to-back with over 50 discs and 3 to 5 full power tee shots each. Caleb threw over 200 shots in a couple hours. So if you appreciate all the work and effort that he puts in for us here at Six Sided Discs, make sure you go and follow him on Instagram, support him in whatever way you can, subscribe to his YouTube channel, and leave some nice comments for him below. Which mid-range surprised you the most? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what future tests we need to do here in our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. From a slight hyzer, the Berry flips up to flat, but only for a split second before gliding and fading its way to the current distance. It comes in 3 different... Whoa, that's a bit everywhere. Ew.
You mean 360 this?
No.
All 360.
Don't hurt yourself.
No, I don't want to hurt myself.
All right,
For the bloops, for the bloops.
All right, 360.
Oh! It definitely didn't feel good though. It did not feel
It
good.
still didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
With a tie at the top, let's see what one overstable and what... But let's move on from that disappointment to our next disc and our first from Discraft. There's a fuzz flying around my head. What is it doing? Which, based on the discs that have flown farthest for us so far, that's pretty good. So much so. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, and today's video is sponsored by Ideo Sports. More about them later in the episode. And for this episode of Flight Numbers Don't Matter, we are going back to a comparison that we tried to do over a year and a half ago on overstable approach discs. And this time, we're going big. 30 overstable approach discs from across the disc golf spectrum are going to be put to the test by me. And of course, the goal is to find out which one is the most accurate and consistent, for me at least. But before we get to our test, I want to be the first to admit that I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. The title of that video we did in April of 2023, and quite a few ideas behind it, revolved around how the Discraft Zone really changed the game for overstable approach discs, and how nearly every single company now makes a Zone clone. But the Discraft Zone is arguably not the first overstable approach disc. The Latitude 64 Cenis was approved by the PDGA 2 years before the Zone in 2006. But the origins of the overstable approach disc probably more directly trace themselves back to the Innova Rhino. The Rhino was approved by the PDGA in November of 1998, and while many people use it as a putter, it is perhaps one of a very small number of discs that performs equally well as a putter and approach disc. In the last 25 years, overstable approach discs have become an essential disc in every player's bag. Now, wherever the overstable approach disc has come from, it's gone a long way to making players feel confident on the course. And another thing that affects your confidence on the course is the right pair of shoes. And that is where today's sponsor comes in, Ideo Sports. The Idiosyncrasy is the only shoe designed specifically for disc golf. Until now. But more on the new Brawler in just a moment. The Syncrasy weighs in at only 12 ounces, keeping you light on your feet during those long tournament days. And with over 600 5-star reviews and a 4.6 overall rating, the Syncrasy is a sure thing. When I bought these Syncrasies in December of 2023, I used their online size guide and got the perfect size the first time. And nearly a year later, they are still in great condition, having already lasted longer than all my 3 previous pairs of hiking shoes. Ideo Sports is excited to announce that their new high-top shoe, the Brawler, is available for pre-order right now. The Brawler builds on the success of the Syncrasy. While both are waterproof, the Brawler features a Sympatex liner that prevents water and dew from getting in your shoe on those wet morning rounds. The Brawler's Adapt-A-Brace is durable but flexible and provides enhanced support for your ankle. Plus, the new quick lacing system with built-in pocket for extra slack allows you to tighten your shoes in an instant with no strings to trip on. The Brawler is estimated to arrive this December and is available in 3 colorways: tan and green, blue and white, or the special edition Corey Ellis Galaxy. Regardless of which shoe is right for you, head over to idiosports.com to get yours and use code 6sided for free shipping today on the only shoes made for disc golf. Huge thanks to Ideo Sports for supporting our channel. Now, back to the video. If you've followed this series for any length of time, you've seen me approach these comparisons in a lot of different ways. Sometimes we're trying to see what category a disc falls into. Sometimes we're just comparing flight paths or drawing conclusions from that. But here, I want to be a little bit more personal and analytical. I will be throwing every single one of these 30 approach discs on forehand and backhand, hyzer, flat, and anhyzer. That's 6 different data points per disc. And the order that I'll be throwing them in will be random each time. I'll be approaching this target from about 140 feet or 42.6 meters, which is outside my comfortable putting range. So this is a real scenario where I would choose to use an approach disc instead of one of my putters. I'll be measuring the distance from the basket for each disc on all 6 throws, and quite simply, the disc with the lowest combined distance wins. I'll also be sharing my personal thoughts on these discs as I go and how they sort of interact with the way I throw. And as a quick disclaimer, I personally bag this pink K1 yarn that I've had for over 2 years. So to keep this as fair as possible for the yarn, I've swapped it out for a different yarn that I have not thrown before. Let's kick things off with the disc we have high hopes for, the Axiom Tempo. Rated at 4.4, 02.5, we've talked about the Tempo quite a bit on our channel. It was highly anticipated, but so far it's only been released in special editions. So we'll be testing the same Proton Soft Tempo from previous videos. Now, I actually have wanted to bag the Tempo before, but today I think I definitively learned why it's not finding a spot in my bag. While it delivered 4.92 feet on a forehand hyzer and was the closest disc on my forehand and hyzer round, I found it too shallow for my backhand grip, and it just consistently landed around 20 feet or so. And unless something crazy happens in this video, I will not be taking my Kastaplast yarn out of my bag to forehand something else. So with a combined total of 71.73 feet, the Tempo gives us a pretty good baseline to meet for the rest of our discs. Moving on now to a popular release from Discmania and their Finnish star, Niklas Anttila. It is their new approach disc, the Drop. The Drop is one of my favorite new disc names in a long time. Often shouted by players as their approach disc nears the basket, the Drop is rated at 4.303 and, surprise surprise, bears some resemblance to the Discraft Zone. And honestly, after this experience, I have mixed feelings about the Drop. I love the stamp, I love the plastic, I love the name, but I struggled to get a consistent release, and it was all over the place. My best shot was on backhand anhyzer, putting it just 3.67 feet away. But it also had one of the worst shots of the day, a forehand anhyzer at 44.78 feet. Coming in with a combined total of 128 feet, it was way off the bar set by the Tempo. So let's see if another disc from Discmania can do any better, with the Tactic. The Discmania Tactic has long been a sort of black sheep in Discmania's lineup. A few of their sponsored pros bag one, but we've always struggled to sell them, and I'm not entirely sure why. But surprisingly, this Neo Tactic outperformed the Drop by some distance. I found it particularly accurate on hyzer releases with an 11.56 on backhand and 5.66 on forehand. The Tactic would come in with a respectable 94.78 feet after all 6 throws. Next up is a disc I'm not very familiar with, the Innova Rat. Here in Star Plastic, the Rat is rated at 4.203, and it's been around since 2017. But in all that time, the only player I've ever seen throw it is Nate Sexton. And frankly, he could probably forehand just about anything. For me though, the Rat was pretty good. I'm not sure I really noticed it in the moment, but looking back at these numbers, I'm super impressed. Both hyzer shots, as well as backhand anhyzer, were super smooth, no farther from the target than 12.2 feet. In fact, the Rat put up an average distance of just 12.34 feet, just shy of the 11.96 from the Tempo. Good for you, Innova Rat. That's one for the underdogs. I do want to point out there are several metrics that I'll be mentioning today, like total combined distance and average distance, as well as average backhand and average forehand. But don't worry, all of these statistics and the full spreadsheet will be available to you at the link in the video description. Now let's see another disc from Innova with the R Pro Pig. The Pig has dropped a bit in popularity since Ricky Wysocki left Innova for dynamic discs and all that Bitcoin and helicopter rides. But the Pig is a tricky one. Typically available in this sticky R-Pro plastic, the Pig has a Rhino-like thumb track, a narrow profile, and it actually flew pretty good for me out at Vista del Camino in Arizona while I was on vacation. But how did it do back here at home in the damp late fall weather of Ohio? Not great. The best shot I managed was this floaty forehand Anheuser landing around 12 feet. But every other shot landed beyond 20 feet. And I think it's a combination of the tacky, sticky R-Pro plastic as well as the shape of the Pig itself. We just didn't get along. The Pig had the worst performance so far at over 137 feet. But what all Innova throwers have been secretly hoping for quite some time is their own zone clone. And Innova has finally delivered with the Toro. I'm not a huge zone fan myself, I've never bagged one, but I see the resemblance, and to be honest, whenever I feel a Toro, I'm not disappointed. Rated at 4213, the Toro started out strong, with a 6.8 and 12.7 on backhand hyzer and flat. But on forehand, I could not get a clean release at all. This flat forehand is a great example where it just spit off left of the target and didn't really fade back. The other 4 throws were all over 20 feet as well, leaving it with 124 feet combined total and average around 20.6. And another quick mention on the statistics, that average distance I think is really important because think about your putting percentage from different distances. If you're 100% from 10 feet, but only 30% from 25 feet, that extra 10 or 15 feet is going to make a huge difference to your actual score. Anyways, let's move on from one zone clone to another and see how I do with the Stokely Thermo Owl. We checked out Scott Stokely's new discs, the Owl, Cardinal, and Wren, in a recent video, and overall I think we were pleased with how they performed. But now that I'm going for accuracy, how will it fare? Well, it's a story of high highs and low lows. My best shot with the Owl was on backhand Anheuser, dropping in right at 7.1 feet. But a forehand Anheuser was way out at 49 feet, which is awful from just 140 feet away. And if there's one thing I'm not super into about the Owl, I think it's the plastic more than the shape. It's just not for me. Next up are a pair of discs that have at least one thing in common, the Lone Star Harpoon and the Westside Harp. But the similarities end immediately after I finish saying their names, because the Harp is a deep, domey, chunky approach disc rated at 4303. And it feels very similar to the Discmania Tactic, which performed well. The Harpoon, on the other hand, has got to be the shallowest approach disc I've ever felt. Now on backhand hyzer, the Harpoon did fine and landed at its closest distance of 8.4. But on forehand, the super shallow rim just fell right out of my hand and landed outside circle 1. The Harp, though, was the same, but different. On a forehand hyzer, which the Harpoon could not handle, the Harp landed just 5.5 feet away. But it had a poor showing on backhand Anheuser, which really hurt its average. The Harp came in with a total of 119 feet to the Harpoon's 132. We interrupt these approach discs with a special bulletin. Our Black Friday sale is happening now. With 20% off all Ledgestone discs, all of our custom stamped discs from Prodigy, Millennium, and Discraft, and a select variety of 50 more discs, this is the perfect time to check out our brand new website at sixsideddiscs.com. With our full selection of mystery boxes, discs from over 20 different manufacturers, as well as accessories and apparel and much more, it's the perfect time to stop by sixsideddiscs.com and do the holiday shopping for the disc golfer in your life, even if that's you. Any purchase you make from our website directly supports the content that we create, so thank you so much for your support. Our Black Friday sale ends Monday at midnight, so get your deals while supplies last. Now, back to the approach discs. And straight back into the action, we have another pair of discs, except these ones have a lot more in common. It's the Clash Mint and Peppermint. The Mint is Clash's first overstable approach disc, rated at 4303. And the Peppermint is a cleverly named, slightly more overstable version at 4202. It shares one piece of its name with the Mint, of course, and the rest with the Pepper, a super overstable distance driver. I actually bagged this Mint briefly last year, but it didn't stay in my bag for long, so let's see what kind of showing it can give us today. On a flat forehand, it was parked at 8.4 feet. While this backhand anhyzer was one of my favorite shots all day. And the Peppermint was, perhaps unsurprisingly, quite similar. Despite not doing as well on forehand, it finished with slightly better numbers than the Mint. A pretty good showing from Clash Discs, but let's move on to a disc from my own personal collection stolen right off the shelf behind me. It's a Prodigy A2. Now, I've never thrown this disc, but I keep it around because Six Sided Discs has, for the last almost 3 years, been the proud sponsor of the Disc Golf Club at Ohio State. This A2 is in 750 Spectrum plastic, a somewhat stiff, swirly premium plastic. And on a forehand hyzer, I got a clean release. It's super overstable, so it quickly came to rest just 7 feet from the basket. On backhand anhyzer, the A2 really showed that overstability, quickly flexing back to the basket at 11 feet. But on forehand anhyzer, that stability proved to be too much, carrying it farther and farther from the basket to around 25 feet. Overall, I have to say the A2 was exactly average for me. I didn't love or hate anything about it, and it finished in the middle of the pack around 98 feet combined distance at an average of 16.39. Next up is a disc that I am certain would sell better if they made it in premium plastic, the ThoughtSpace Temple. Rated at 4303, the Temple is only available in Nerve plastic, a soft base plastic. And for that reason alone, it may struggle because I haven't used a base plastic for approaches in a long time. And the only other one in this test so far, the Harpoon, well, it didn't do great. But the Temple, it's a different story. For me, the Temple was nothing if not consistent. 5 of the 6 throws landed between 12 and 17 feet, like this flat backhand at 15, or this flat forehand at 16. But this Temple also managed to pull off the closest shot all day at just 2.4 inches. That's 6.09 centimeters for our overseas audience. That consistency plus one really great shot means the Temple delivers 76.73 combined distance, just behind the Tempo from Axiom. Now we've still got a bunch of discs to go and some exciting ones including several zones, so stick around for that. But first, let's talk about a few discs that didn't quite live up to expectations. For example, the Infinite Rays, which is a deep approach disc, and I have to say, I am not a fan of super deep discs. So while I did okay with it on backhand, it really struggled on forehand. Not to mention the iBlend plastic was super slick in the cold weather. It finished with a combined total of 124 feet. Somehow even less comfortable on forehand was the Infinite iBlend Tomb, which did even worse, with a combined total of over 140 feet. It was very nearly the worst performing disc of the day. One disc that I was disappointed with was the Luft Neon. The Neon's reverse dome and total lack of glide makes it super unique and different. But unfortunately, that also makes it very difficult to throw on the angle that you want, at least for me. With a combined total of 138 feet, the Neon definitely could have done better. This Streamline Stabilizer is a disc that I've long wanted to like. I love MVP's plastics, their stamps are always classy, but the stabilizer just doesn't agree with my forehand. And while it wasn't surprising, it wasn't great either. Our last disappointing disc, really, I don't know if you can say it's disappointing because I just didn't have any expectations for it at all. This is the Doomsday Clandestine Area 51. It was extremely shallow, similar to the Harpoon, and its stability alone was perplexing. On a backhand anhyzer, I put a lot of angle on it, and it quickly fought out. But on a forehand anhyzer, even with plenty of height, it had no fight back at all. The Area 51 actually landed outside Circle 1 on 3 of the 6 throws. so its combined total of 154 feet was the worst by far. On the flip side of 5 discs that were a bit disappointing, I have 4 discs that exceeded my expectations. Starting with the Lone Star Copperhead. The last of our base plastic approach discs, the Copperhead is interesting. With a similar shape and thumb track to the Pig, I would have expected to have similar struggles with it. But it's just a touch shallower than the Pig, and as a result, put up some decent numbers. The closest was this forehand Anheuser at 11.9 feet, with the Copperhead finishing with 101 feet combined score. On to another respectable showing. Let's take a look at the MVP Entropy. Here in Neutron Plastic, the Entropy was a mixed bag, but overall better than I expected. A 6-foot backhand Anheuser and an 8-foot forehand Heiser offset the unfortunate 42-foot forehand Anheuser and finished with a decent 104.14 feet. Another disc I would classify as decent-ish is the DGA Breaker. While it didn't work well on my forehand, averaging around 27 feet, the Breaker did very well on backhand, averaging about 15 feet, coming in with a total combined distance of 110 feet. Respectable. But if there's any disc that we threw today that really genuinely caught me off guard, it's a disc that we've thrown before, the Jester Disc Golf Wild Thing. We actually threw the Wild Thing in several plastics recently, and I found it to be super overstable in every blend. Today we have it in their grippy glow plastic, and while it was pretty dismal for me on forehand, averaging 29 feet, it registered 1.7, 1.97, and 4.52 feet across all 3 backhand throws, making it the most accurate disc that I threw on backhand, period. In fact, I think I'm going to put this Wild Thing in the bag for a little bit and see if that trend continues. Next up though, let's see the 2 most overstable discs that we threw all day, the Discraft ESP Zone OS and Goliath Discs Pillar. Now these are both discs that we've thrown before, so to a certain extent I know what to expect. But even with those expectations, these were intense. They are also both deeper and chunkier than any other disc that I threw for this test, and as a result, some of the releases were pretty bad. They both did great on Heiser, but not much else. The Zone OS had 104 feet of combined distance, while the Pillar had 103. Next up, we have a pair of rubber discs, the Divergent Discs Golem and the recently released Elevation Discs Screech. Both rated at 4204, they are actually less alike than you might think. While Divergent's Golem is in a synthetic silicone rubber, this Screech is in Elevation's EcoFlex natural rubber blend, which makes it extremely durable and tacky. And frankly, both of these discs massively exceeded my expectations. Our past experiences with rubber discs are not what I'd call particularly successful, but the Screech did great on backhands, averaging 9.5 feet. But the Golem did even better, with an overall average of 11.79 feet. That was much better than the Screech's 16.9. The only thing that held back either of these discs were forehands, because I don't know, maybe it's just me, but floppy discs on forehand, they don't really work. Now though, let's move on to what many of you have been waiting for, the Discraft Zone. Yes, of course, we couldn't do this test without including the gold standard of overstable approach discs, and to make sure we cover our bases, we're going to include 2, with this recently released seasonal Glow Z Zone and last year's Adam Hammes Tour Series ESP Zone. The seasonal Glow Z plastic released in fall of 2024. And while the glow quality may not be consistent as we found in our recent glow comparison, they fly just fine, because this Glow Zone put up some excellent numbers. It was parked very nearly against the pole at 7 inches on a flat backhand approach, and was in 10 to 15 foot tap-in range on several others. Finishing with a combined total of 98.16 feet, the seasonal Glow Z Zone performed very well, and was definitely in the top 10 overall. And surprise, surprise, the Zone is nothing if not consistent, because the ESP Zone also put up some good numbers. 7 feet on a backhand Heiser, 6 feet on a flat backhand, But if I have any complaints, it's that the zone just doesn't feel that good in my forehand grip. But I already knew that. The ESP zone finished just a tad lower on our list than the Glow Z at 104 feet total. In fact, we were so concerned with including enough zones in this test that I threw in a Zone GT as our next to last disc, which frankly has a very simple story today. It was great on hyzer and bad on everything else, leaving it worse off than either of the other zones at a total distance of 112 feet. So that takes us to our last disc, the winner of this competition, and in hindsight, it is not very surprising that it is the approach disc that I bag, the Kastaplast K1 yarn. Now, once again, I'll remind you all that I've been bagging this pink K1 yarn, which has the faintest of puddle tops, since the very first stock release of the yarn in early 2022. I intentionally for this test used a completely different yarn, but that didn't seem to matter because it was the most accurate forehand disc by far, with an average distance of just 5 feet. And that makes sense because that is exactly what I use the yarn for in my bag, forehand approaches. But what the yarn did differently to other discs in our test is it also did pretty good on backhand, even though I never throw my yarn on backhand. It landed at 9.44 feet, 4.13, and 20.32, giving it a backhand average of 11.3, which if we rank all of these discs by average backhand distance, the yarn would finish 7th. But its forehand score was so good, it gives it a final combined distance of 49.08, and it blew the rest of the discs away. The Divergent Discs Golem came in second place over 20 feet back at 70.71, with the Axiom Tempo, the very first disc we saw, in third place with 71.73. As I mentioned earlier, there will definitely be a link to this entire spreadsheet in the video description. I have a lot of thoughts on this test as a whole and several key takeaways that I want to talk about. But the first one is just how valuable practice and experience can be. In the end, I think it makes perfect sense that the disc that I've bagged for almost 3 years was the best performing disc. But I think that would also be true if any one of you watching this did the exact same test and included the mold that you've bagged for a few years. You'd probably have a similar result. In my opinion, what these statistics really show is that the more that you use a disc, the better you get with it. And that's not to say that there isn't some value in trying and experimenting with new discs, but don't give up on a disc just because it doesn't work out after a couple throws. And really take that advice, because that's hard for me to give as somebody who sells discs as their job. What surprised you about all of the discs I tested and how they flew for me? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what other large-scale comparisons that you want to see here on Flight Numbers Don't Matter. Huge thanks again to Ideo Sports for supporting our channel and sponsoring this video. Make sure you go to ideosports.com and use code 6SIDEDDiscs to get free shipping on your Syncrasy or Brawlers. And lastly, don't forget to check out our Black Friday sale running now through Monday, December 2nd at 6SIDEDDiscs.com. We greatly appreciate your support. For 6-Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. But if there's any disc that officially... Not bad. But next up, let's take a look right at... Wild Thing.
Ooh, nice.
This flat forehand is a great example where it just
Oh, it's cold and wet. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you next time.
If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.